Hello, I hope you're having a fantastic day. I am sort of. The reason why I'm not having a fantastic day, or you could argue I'm not, is because I was trying to upload the power rankings today. Today is the 10th of January. However, the audio problems were even worse than I expected. And I came to the conclusion that it's a combination of me recording too long at a time, and also the fact that I was trying to record in slideshows. So what you're looking at is actually not the presentation, it's just the screen. I'm just going to crop it down, so hopefully it'll look fine. But yeah, this is the Fraxure Division Power Rankings. It is way overdue. And yeah, there's going to be cuts out. There's probably about 4 or 5, because I'm cutting every half an hour or so. But yeah, hopefully this should be all better. Anyway, let's get into it, because that's what you guys want to see. This power ranking, it's going to be me assessing teams based on the style I think they execute. So, also I've got water here, excuse me, I'm going to need it as it goes on, trust me. But anyway, in OBS we've got a lot of very good teams, they're very privileged in that sense, and I don't think any team in this league is bad per se. There's just something's got to be 16th and 15th in all this. So if you are in that position, please don't take it the wrong way. Because it is my opinion. I'm not a genius, I'm not some Pokemon wizard. I'm also going to swear once or twice, because that's what I'm like. But yeah, I'm not some Pokemon guru. I am a dude who plays Pokemon in a few different leagues, and I'm trying to put out a power game, because I have more experience than certain people in the league will, and maybe there's some enjoyment in watching me ramp about teams. Now, as I said, I'm judging these teams based on the style they execute, so here's a quick rundown of what I am looking to see in certain styles. This is not a complete list of all the styles that exist, but these are the main ones that come up. There's only 1 or 2 teams on this whole division that are not one of these styles. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I can't remember if I've got hard style after this, so I'm not going to move on just yet. But yeah, so this is my opinion. What else do I need to say? I just want to get into this first. I just want to get this up because you guys have been waiting long enough for this. Is there a hard stall? There is. Whoops. Well, this is hard stall if you care. But anyway, let's get going. First up is Chris Sama. Now, this roster is quite confusing to me. Also, by the way, I am reading from a script of sorts, so yeah, I will occasionally break from that script, and you'll probably be able to tell when I do. But yeah, I just thought I'd let you know. Anyway, this roster is quite confusing to me, because as I said, I like to judge the teams based on how they execute the team style they're using, but I have no idea what team style this is. Because you've got a terrifying sweeper like Roaring Moon, you've got an amazing breaker in Zard Y, who by the way are pretty great together, but then you're paired with momentum sinks like Pex and Avalon, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it seems like you're trying to support Zard Y with Magic Bounce, because you've got Hatterene, and you've got 4 spinners, but then your only defogger is Zard Y itself, which is just unusual to me. I have noticed, by the way, if Chris was going to this, that this roster does include every type in the game, which might explain some of the picks later on. Avalon is trying to get a Rock and Ice type in the same slot, for example. That doesn't exclude Spidops, though. I don't get my Spidops there. But yeah, anyway. The team just feels incredibly chaotic to me. Terra Flying Roaring Moon is a really fun set, which is the Terra type. Though it could end up to me being both predictable and it also adds to the stealth elements, because this team doesn't have that. Terra Water Hat is a bit odd to me as well, since Hat doesn't get any water moves. I know, by the way, Terra Water Hat is standard on ladder. I understand that it's standard on ladder, but it's standard on ladder because you're facing things like Goldengo, right, all the time. It means you're facing things like Great Tusk, and water is a good neutral option for these Pokemon. I don't like it here, because you've already got a Pex for that bulky water roll, and if it's specifically to deal with Steels trying to get up hazards, then go with Fire, because at least you have Mystical Fire, and can boost that, and can really threaten back. With Water, you're just, I don't know, I just don't really see it. The pivoting's also quite hit and miss, I think, which I value in most team styles, and I'm assuming this one too. I'd say I don't really understand the style. Because Alecki is a great mon, Regieleki, but it is predictable without Terra, and we haven't got Terra Blast here, so yeah, so it's predictable. And Volt Switch Treads is not a mainstay option. Like, it's a good option, don't get me wrong, and you're going to run it on things like Assault Vest and Scarf, but it's not a mainstay option. Slitherwing's amazing U-turner, no notes. Spidops is terrible. Plenty of notes on that, but we're not talking about Spidops. And though Roaring Moon is a great U-turn user, to me, U-turn is kind of contradictory. Not contradictory, it clashes with Terra Flying, yeah? Because Terra Flying likes to run things like DD, Acrobatics, Booster Energy, and that is totally antithetical to U-turn, you know? It also gives it a rock sweetness, so you're forcing yourself to run Boots, Roaring Moon, which I think is a bit of a waste, if you want to U-turn about with it. So, yeah, I mean, if you're not going to Terra, if you're going to mainly Terra the Hatterene, then that's completely fair enough. I'll definitely tell you that Roaring Moon is a great U-turn user. But if you're Terra Flying with the Roaring Moon, I just don't see it. The speed tier is also kind of wild. You go from 40 in Delmise to 81 in Slitherwing, and then up to 100 with Meltank and Zard. That's a massive speed gap, and you're letting all sorts of things run speed boosting natures. All sorts of Scarpers run speed boosting natures, assuming you don't want to be the Lecky. And, you know, it's not gonna... You're only gonna run speed on a few Pokemon in this roster, or at least significant speed, I think, in Roaring Moon, Tread, Zard, Lecky, and Slitherwing, which is going to exacerbate how slow this roster is going to feel. I get Spidops is meant to help, but this roster feels like it's several parts of one style, and then several parts of another style, and several parts of a third style, thrown on the same thing, and the bits just aren't meshing together. This team is also incredibly ground weak. It's very ground weak. I mentioned before this roster has at least one of every type in the game, but it's the distribution of those types that is making this ground weak. Your team's ground and water, which are types typically used to take on opposing offensive grounds, are both weak to Earthquake itself. They get free entry on a Lecky, the most you can do is spin or screens on it or something. They have almost all ground types will carry rock coverage for Zard. They don't care that much about Slitherwing, and Slitherwing can't do that much back, depending on the ground type. You know, if it's Land OT, what else Slitherwing going to do to it? What's anything going to do to it in that case? You know. But yeah, what else was it? Delmise is honestly your best response to ground types, which for me is not an enviable position to be in. But yeah, the more I look at this roster, I realise that it gets shredded by Golurk, which is a unique distinction, I suppose. It made me laugh a little bit because Golurk is Golurk. But yeah, I expect this team to dominate some games against the right opponent, but to struggle in a lot of others. And I just don't see the angle of the team at all, which is why I gave it a 3 out of 10. So, we got that out of the way, we got 16th out of the way, I apologise. But let's move on to our next one, which is Geek Yogurt. I believe it's Geek. For a while I thought it was Greek, but then I check and think it's Geek, so I'm going to say Geek. If I got it wrong again, I apologise. But yeah, you might be surprised to see this roster here. Just look at it. It's a very top-heavy roster that's going to rely on the same set of Pokemon week in, week out. These being, of course, Valiant, Zeraora, Victini, Mega Garchomp, and Celestia. I expect 3 or 4, if not all of them, will come basically every week, because they're just that potent. However, if they do, then Superior is basically required to come most weeks as a required ground killer, because bulky ground types seriously annoy that first type. They really do. They all have ways of hurting it a bit if the ground type happens to be weak. So, you know, particularly weak to Grass Knot and Zeraora can do something, and Victini can Energy Ball, and Chomp can SD and all this stuff, and Celesteela's coverage. But my point is, nothing loves switching into them, and apart from Steela, and Steela isn't particularly offensive anymore because it's lost its Optimize, so it's not going to be able to retch his momentum back. Celesteela, is a lot more easy to exploit these days. Yeah, as I say, the threats are dangerous. The speed tiers are definitely solid. You've got, you know, 92/102 with Chomp, 100 Victini, 116 I think for Valiant, 143 for Zera, 113 for Serp off the top of my head. Not sure. But yeah, that's pretty good in my book. You've got immediate threats, Scarfers, bans, specs, options, setup threats, 2 great offensive pivots. Like, Victini and Zeraora are terrific offensive pivots. Although, you know, if Zeraora wants to Volt Switch, you've got to deal with that ground type. But, you know. And also, I should say, every roster has a ground type. I don't know if literally every roster does in this division, but in my view, they should. I think they do actually. So yeah. Yeah. Another thing I do actually very much like about the team is all 4 are Valiant, Victini, Zero Aura, Garchomp, and to an extent Steeler can viably run both physical and special sets, which is really good because it lets them beat their checks and break a game open, which is a huge plus. You know, if you've got a situation where you've got one Pokemon that's simultaneously checking Victini, Zero Aura, and Garchomp, say Spadef Powder, right? And then you run Carmine Air Balloon or something, Zero Aura, and then you manage to beat the Howden with it, you'll get the game broke open for Victini to spam the advantage V-Crits. And while we're talking about Victini, Terrify Victini seems like a really, really excellent figure. And with the large number of faster Pokemon and viable starters on this roster, like Valiant and Superior, Victini's free to not run stuff. Run Boots or Band or Specs, which is how you really get the most out of Victini. Victini is going to shine the most in this team because it's got that speed support that it's not forced to run Scarf. Because Scarf Victini is the easiest one to handle. I think everyone knows that. Scarf Victini is the easiest one to handle. It doesn't do as much damage as the others, and it can be worn down quite easily with rocks. That is why it's so good this roster does not force Scarf Victini in the slightest. You could the whole season never bring Scarf Victini, and it would probably make sense every single time. I haven't looked at the matchups though, so that might be bollocks, but you know. I like the idea of Terra Water Surb to remove its fire weakness, allow for easier setup, but by account of Terra Blast being banned, I don't think water was the right choice. Personally, I would have gone Dragon. Because it gives you Stab Dragon Pulse to get past your Dragon type checks. And it also hits your opposing fire, grass, and poison types. You keep that fire resistance, you keep the water resistance, you get a grass resistance too. Dragon's just a great defensive type, and you don't really lose much by taking Dragon typing. And you get a Stab Dragon Pulse, which to me is very significant. Because Superior, often when we need to check Superior, something with respectable special bulk and a grass resistance. But as soon as you throw in Stab Dragon Pulse, something like Tangrowth or something is not a check, because you're not only not weak to Sludge Bomb anymore, but you've got a Stab Dragon Pulse, probably at +2. So, yeah, I would have liked to see Terra Dragon, but Terra Water is pretty decent. Liepard I feel like is only Terra because, you know, Terra can definitely, which I understand. This roster, in my view, has 3 main issues that hold it back. The first one is the hazard game. It's very poor in my opinion. You've got one Rocker, which is also your Spiker in main Garchomp, and one Toxic Spikes user. Now, Weezing is not going to come most weeks. I expect 2-3 games maybe. So T-Spikes will mostly not come, because I mean, Weezing doesn't even have to run T-Spikes, so yeah, you might get 1 or 2 T-Spikes uses in a season. Furthermore, Blastoise and Superior are the only removal options on this team, and they both limit themselves by running removal. Blastoise is better at this because the only thing that running removal does means it can't really run Shell Smash. Which, you know, isn't the worst thing in the world. You've got plenty of offensive threat anyway, but I wanted to make note anyway. And with Superior, fitting default means that it's, you know, it's got a lot of other moves it would rather run. It has to run Leaf Storm on every set, unless you're doing something crazy like Overgrow SD, which I've seen, it's actually really fun. But you have to run Leaf Storm on every set. And then you want things like Knockoff, Glare, Leech Seed, Sub, Dragon Pulse, potentially even something like Ring Out. I've seen Ring Out before, Ring Out's cool. But yeah, you need these other moves, and so fitting default not only means you don't run one of those other moves, but you lose momentum. Because you've brought your Superior on, ready to start boosting, you have to take the time to play habits. So, I don't like the removal, personally. Second and thirdly, which is kind of related to the first one actually, this roster lacks bulk, and especially just lacks longevity as a whole. The roster is trying to play at a faster pace, but because of that, the moment the game is slowed down, the bulk can be exposed. The 2 best defensive Pokemon in this roster, which are Celesteela and Blastoise, they don't pack reliable recovery, they share an electric weakness, meaning that Volt Switch, like an opposing Volt Switcher, say a Coco or something, that's going to be really scary for this team. And they don't resist rocks either, which is really significant. A well-played bulky team, in my opinion, should not struggle to really punish this team. It will wear this team down pretty effectively, I would have thought. Unless this roster is wield us sufficiently aggressively. The saving grace for this roster is that first 4/5 are really, really terrifying. So, yeah, I've got to give him credit for that. Can't lie. This roster does have potential, but the thing with offensive rosters in this current gen, and for a couple of gens now, if I'm honest, they need some semblance of longevity. But yeah, the defensive flaws in this roster really significantly held it back for me. And as a result, I did give it a 4 out of 10. Moving swiftly onwards, and taking forever to scroll there because of my 11,000 word notes. Where is it? Is this right? 14th. Yeah, Peachy. Right. Peachy, let's get rid of that. That looks damn unprofessional, even though that's clearly what this video is. Peachy, I think, drafted Hyper Offense. The pieces are not incredibly obvious, and I've not looked at Peachy's replays to see if that's how they played this. I want to try and be as fair as I can. The pieces are not incredibly obvious, but I'm going to judge this roster as a Hyper Offense team because I think that's how it will get the best results. Or at least it'll certainly get results playing that on occasion. Because I think this does have the tools for it. But for the record, I could also see this being hazard stacking balance or bulky offense, should it choose to go those directions. The reason I'm calling this hyper offense is because everything on this roster can be broken into 3 categories quite neatly. There's hazard leads, you've got setup sweepers, and the last category, which is basically just slow growth new, is the momentum regainers. I also like slow growth and teleport trick room as well. Yeah, teleport trick room. The Iron Hands, which is really good support for that as well. One of the things I tend to not like about hyper offense drafts in general is they neglect the need for a suicide lead. Peachy has gone the other way and drafted 5, arguably, in Mew, Skarmory, Roserade, Leavanny, and Blewett, which, you know, is loads. With the first 2, Mew and Skarmory, being incredibly reliable at getting usually a rock, like Stuff Rocks and Layer Spikes. Mew, of course, can be a breaker and sweep itself, but I'm listing everything in here because it's Mew, Skarmory, and Roserade, all the Spike Seeds are a good variety in my opinion because they can cover lots of active lead options. Roserade can status with things like Sleep Powder and Stun Spore. Skarm can Whirlwind, Punish a different Rocky Hammer, and it's still has the force of Taunt. And Mew can just do whatever it wants. Mew can do whatever it wants, including threatening significant damage back, super effective coverage. As I say, Taunt, Toxic Spikes, what have you. In my view, though, one of these leads should be over base 100 speed. Something like Frostlass. Otherwise, you risk not getting everything you want out of it. So, Frostlass I'm flogging because Frostlass is my favourite lead in hyper offense. I've used a handful of them, and Frostlass is my favourite because it's so consistent in every single matchup. It's very, very difficult to stop a Frostlass lead from getting what it wants. Because of things like, with obviously spikes, Taunt, Will-O-Wisp, Destiny Bond, Disable, Curse Body, the Ghost typing, so it's something to fake out, which is really important because that's a way you can generally stop a lot of leads. It also means a rapid spin, so they can't beat your lead by spamming spin, which is really nice. Which obviously spin can't be taunted. It's also got great coverage. Icy Wind. Frostlass is so much better. I actually love Frostlass as a suicide thing. But yeah, let's say it doesn't have to be Frostlass, but something faster. A faster rocker with those sorts of tools, I think would be really beneficial. Aerodactyl potentially is decent as well. In my opinion, it is unusual for hyper offense to have as many sweepers as it does leads, but Peachy is pushing the boat out, it seems. With Mew, Enamorus, Iron Hands, Mega Gyarados, and Zygarde 10 all being the sort of sweepers identified and having huge offensive potential, but Enamorus is especially important because it is the only out-and-out special attack. With early game hazard support and momentum, Gyarados and Zygarde are really good breakers/sweepers, especially with Gyarados, I love that thing. Or if Peachy fancies a more direct route, you've got Belladrum Iron Hands, which is a really, really good breaker as well, and it's possible to revenge kill without something stupid and strong like Land OI. And even then I'm willing to bet AB takes 1, or Sugar or something like that. But yeah, Mew adaptable as ever, obviously, and it will help fill the gaps in offensive coverage left by the others, which is a really crucial role. Excuse me, I apologise. I am concerned about this draft having to do with defensive grasses. Something like Fizz Left Tango sits on so much of this team, and it just spams knockoff and leech seed. You know, it's a real pain. Amoongus, as a clear smog user, can really irritate most of this team. So, you know, I want to make note of that. Slowbro is a nice tool for regaining momentum, though, in case your opponent gets it back from you. I'd like to regenerate it multiple times a game. I mean, you don't have to try and get off that. I should say, probably, I did skip over this a little bit, the whole idea of a suicide lead in hyper offense is that it guarantees you start the game with momentum. Because if hyper offense team does not start the game with momentum, that normally just spells a loss. They absolutely 100% need that momentum. They need hazards, they need ideally a 1-for-1 trade. That's an amazing lead. But honestly, getting a rocking spike or a spike and a burn on the opposing Pokemon, and then you can set out something that abuses that other Pokemon that they've used to beat your lead, that is what Hyper Offense really wants to do. And Hyper Offense does require a lot of careful prep. But yeah. So yeah, when you lose that momentum, you don't want to just always lose. Slowbro is good at getting it back, which is why I like it. I do, however, have some big issues with this team. As far as hyper offense goes, it is very slow. 3 mons base 100 and higher is not very fast whatsoever. And due to Gyarados and Megastone, PG only has a limited pool of Scarfers, or viable Scarfers anyway, which I think you and Amorous and Bros are right. I don't think I'd Scarf anything else. Possibly Zydog, but probably not. Sticky Web can help with this, but lots of fast threats like Chien-Pao run boots. And as such, would have free reign over this kind of roster, unless you played very, very carefully and intelligently early on. And run stuff like Chien-Pao lure stuff, like, I don't know, Yachi and Amorous, and especially physically bulky Gyarados, or something like that, you know. This is off script, by the way, I'm going back on script now. No Dark until Mega Gyarados Mega Evolved is a little bit significant. And the Dragon being Zydog means that you lack a lot of the defensive utility that the Dragon typing provides. The No Dark until Mega Gyarados Mega Evolved thing is important because you have no other Ghosts to resist on this roster. And Ghosts are some of the most dangerous Pokemon in Draft, and not just Pokemon in general, when left unchecked. Like, if you imagine something like a Specs Blacephalon or a Specs Gengar leading off against anything besides Gyarados, it's trouble. You know, it really is trouble. I suppose against Zygarde and Amorous, it might have a bit more difficulty. But against 90% of this roster, those Specs Ghost types, and even just like a Life Orb or Scarf set of Ghost type, it's going to really hurt this team. But yeah. I wasn't, by the way, stating that Gyarados and Zydog should be run defensively. A big part of hyper offense is forcing your opponent into uncomfortable situations, using your Pokemon's power, yes, but defensive typing and natural bulk too. It's why Mega Gyarados sets up a lot easier than something like Mega Absol, right? And hyper offense teams rely on these kind of interactions to succeed, and these 50-50s, which experienced HO players get right more often than not. This team does also seem to lack a sort of backup plan. I mentioned that it can do a variety of different things, in terms of hazard stacking, balance, bulky offense, what have you. Hazard stacking, I don't know what I said. But yeah, I said that do some things, but once you commit to hyper offense, this team can only really do one kind of hyper offense, i.e. physical setup, Scarf and Amorous, or Specs and Amorous, right? It's not going to deviate much from that, and so, if it were me, I would want more variation in the hyper offense threats. I'd want probably a couple of special trackers, I want some more fast threats, because your speed right now depends on either Scarf and Amorous, or Gyarados and Zygarde using their speed for Dragon Balls. So again, a faster Scarf or something like Scarf Koko. What are you gonna do? Scarf Koko really, really ruins his team. So, you know, where was that to? Yeah. It's going to be really prediction reliant, is the main point I was trying to get, for Peachy, and, I've completely lost my place. Yeah, prediction reliant, and in my opinion, the offensive threats are not really varied enough, to force prep to the extent that a team like this has to. I did right here too many leads spill the graph, that's a bad joke, but, yeah. moving on, and we'll do one more thing before I have a little restart, so there'll be a little cut. We have number 13, which is Angular Penny, and I have gone to the wrong place on my notes. I thought it was someone else. Right. Whoops. One moment. Here we are. If we had an reward for fastest roster, we'd probably give it to Penny. Because DOS and Mega Aerodactyl is a ridiculously fast pairing. And if you didn't see the rest of this roster, and you just saw DOS and Mega Aerodactyl, you might assume it's hyper offense, or a fast-paced team with hazard leads, or even maybe sand, or a weird fair into stall, because stall does like those faster Pokemon, to sort of contain opposing threats if things get out of hand, and wall breakers and such. It is because of that I was immediately surprised to notice that these two ridiculously fast Pokemon are paired with Tinglu and Ferrothorn, which itself is not inherently bad, as you might think that Spikes and Rocks are really good support for the US and Aerodactyl, and you're right. But the reason why this has me scratching my head is the synergy. Tinglu and Ferro are both very bulky hazard setting tanks, and they have a habit of being momentum sinks if the matchup and moveset are right, or if they get status, which one of those is very plausible in a given game. How are you supposed to take advantage of DOS and Mega Aero when you've got Tinglu and Ferrothorn taking up all that real estate, in terms of points as well as anything? So you're either going to have to leave one at home a lot, or you're going to have to fill up the last two slots with Pivot. Which again isn't the worst thing in the world. There's a Vaporeon there, which does really help out the flip zone, but that is one Pokemon, and it's the only reliable defensive pivot here that is susceptible to being busted through by choice attackers. You know? It also doesn't help that Vaporeon doesn't resist many things that... isn't weak... Hang on, how do I phrase this? Doesn't resist things that Mega Aerodactyl and Deoxys don't resist themselves, if that makes sense. So, something that switches into Vaporeon, chances are it's not going to let Aero in, and Dio in free. Because if you're switching in a Grass or Electric type, or even an opposing Water type to deal with Vaporeon, you can't flip tongue up Vaporeon and then get an Aero and Dio. You know, because they'll threaten them as well. Or at least they'll won't have a bad matchup. But I have started off harshly. I started off very harshly. There are a number of good points in this roster, which aren't as obvious as the things I just mentioned. I wrote this, the notes I wrote as I thought. I haven't reordered them, so that was just the first thing. I do really like the format of this roster. I really do. It's Terra Electric, which is really good to break open those force types in combination, the combination of Ferrothorn, Vaporeon, Aerodactyl, helps Cormot with ground types, which is really helpful. Cormot also helps break the darks that annoy DOS, and the steals that annoy both fast attackers, and can run Natural Cure to absorb status from both of them. It even just is straight up immune to paralysis, so that's what we're worried about. It's on Volt Absorb, benefit from that. That's really, really good. That's really, really good. I also think Tauros Fire, Paldea Blaze, I'm going to call it Tauros Fire. I think that's a good pick, because it helps deal with the grasses that Vaporeon can't hurt, Parathorn can't leaf seed them, and it spreads burns with Will-O-Wisp for Zoroark to abuse with Hex. Same goes for Dragalge and Toxic Spikes. Synergy! Dragalge is also a great switch to most fairy types, which severely annoy the entire rest of the roster, or basically the rest of the roster. Because, like, just for a moment, pretend Dragalge isn't there, and then imagine this team versus something like the Magic Guard Fizz Death left. I'll give you a couple seconds. I'll have a drink of water while you do. Because, yeah, it messes up this team. Magic Guard Fizz Death left, like the Flamethrower. This team really struggles. It really does. It does nothing for it. Like, last month's soft-boiled knockoff Moonblast. You know, what are you going to do? You're not. You need Dragalge to think about. Or Calm Mind. Calm Mind is a knockoff. Very plausible. Good sweep as well. Depends what they want to do with that. Dragalge is important for moments like that. Because moments where Ferrothorn can't do as much as it would necessarily like. I'm now going to spend ages talking about Zoroark, which is an interesting pick to me. Because it does have a number of great traits, including good speed, 3 immunities, illusion, setup, and an offensive U-turn, all of which this team loves to have. And it is also probably the best choice item user on the roster, although to be fair, there isn't much competition outside of Cormot, and I guess the others. The issue, though, is that one of Zoroark's most unique traits in Illusion is totally wasted in this roster. And I'm going to explain why. It's going to make it very hard to work. For example, Dr. Speed, Ting-Lu, and Tauros all have abilities that proc on entry. You cannot get rid of Pressure, you cannot get rid of Vessel of Ruin, so if you don't see them, but you do see DOS and Ting-Lu, you know it's Zoroark. Same with Intimidate on Tauros. You're never going to run Anger Point and Kaiju. Intimidates the best ability by far, so you know if it's Zoroark. Furthermore, core mods cannot be easily bluffed either, and this is going to take a bit of explaining, because setting aside the whole Rock's resistant thing and core mod doesn't mean one thing. Core mod is your terror, offensively. And what happens when Illusion tries to copy a Pokemon that has already terrestrialized is it will copy its species, but it will not copy its terror status. So if you've terrestrialized Pormok and then later in the battle switch in Zoroark pretending to be Pormok, it will appear as a Pormok that is not terrestrialized. Therefore you know it's a Zoroark. Right? Same could plausibly apply to Vaporeon, but mainly for Pormok. So yeah, I've managed to do it in a lot less words than I have it on my notes. Oh, excuse me. But I will put my notes up as well if anyone wants to read them. This means that the only Pokemon that Zoroark can feasibly pretend to be, from this point, are Vaporeon, Aerodactyl, Ferrothorn, and Dragalge. Except it can't pretend Aerodactyl. You know why? Because this roster has no hazard removal except for Aero itself. And so if Zoroark switches in pretending to be Aero, and you see neutral self-rock damage on none because of boots, it's obvious it's not Aero, it's Zoroark. If you see Mega Aero come in and take normal self-rock damage, it's Mega Aero. Right? And there's no way to get around that because you just have no other cover. Which is really unfortunate in a roster like this. You're not going to be able to block hazards from any kind of team except maybe Hyper Offense with the Oxy Speed, with Taunt, Magic Bounce type stuff. Not Magic Bounce, Magic Code. So yeah, even now though, we know Aerodactyl's out the way. You can't block Aerodactyl, not reliable. Ferrothorn is also hard as a block. Again, Self-Rock's always going to be there. Ferrothorn never runs boots because it's Rock's resistant. Toxic Spike's immune. You know, it's neutral to spikes, but people don't really run boots for spikes very often because it's fairly uncommon. So, you know, if Rocks are up, which they will pretty much always be, Ferrothorn is going to take Rocks damage, and if it doesn't, it's probably Zoroark, right? And if it does, and it's neutral Rock damage, it's Zoroark. Vaporeon does take neutral Rock damage, but not only was Zoroark not a common leftover disease, it can be on Soft Mine and Subplot, and which I think it gets worked out. But Vaporeon switches in regularly throughout the game. It's going to take lots of damage, it's going to wish up and heal up its HP, and its HP is very rarely going to be a number that will match Zoroark's apart from 100% at the start of the game. So it's not something that you can reliably count on, right? In my view. And that basically just leaves Dragalge. As Rock's neutral, doesn't necessarily have to run leftovers, but could, very plausibly. Could also very plausibly run boots. But Zoroark doesn't abuse the Pokemon that Dragalge baits in very much. The only thing is Psychic Waves. So that's extremely limited use of Illusion. Only one Pokemon in your entire roster can be convincingly bluffed by Zoroark. So, yeah. I mean, if you want to leave a Ferrothorn and against a fighting type, and you actually Zoroark, that could work as something I could see working, but again, not reliable. I think that's going to be the most common use of Illusion for Angular in Leeds, or Penny, sorry, I should say Penny. But yeah, anyway, last thoughts before I start a new recording, is that this team has very little offensive freedom, right? Which is not something that DOS likes. It feels like Penny made a sort of bulky offense team, then got rid of its defogger and threw on DOS and Mega Aerodactyl. That's honestly what it feels like. They're both so amazing Pokemon, but they're so out of place. Combine that with the fact that Ting-Lu and Ferrothorn are doing largely the same thing, and therefore are an inefficient use of both team points and team slots. Lack of reliable recovery on the defensive Pokemon outside of Vaporeon, which is good, but can't do it all itself. Poor pivoting and I expect getting on the front foot to be quite difficult this year, with Gash very reactive. No hazard removal outside of Mega Aerodactyl, which not only doesn't like fitting but can't hold boots. Yeah, this roster is a deal for me. It's better for River 4 for me because it does have a lot of very potent Pokemon. It does have some good synergy, but the flaws hold it back too much more, and I did give it a 4.5 out of 10. Moving swiftly onwards. Oh, we're not moving swiftly onwards yet, we are stopping the recording, so I'll be back in 1 second. Hello, back again. I didn't realise the music was so loud, so sorry about that. I'm not going to re-record it because I'm on my last recording this. But anyway, moving onwards, we have Hellos, and holy fucking goodness, look at this. We've got Chi-Yu, Annihilate, Ursaluna, Maushold, Tatsugiri, and Hisuian Braviary. I mean, it's safe to say that nothing's going to save people with this roster. The best one I can even think of defensively against this roster is probably Tapu Fini, but even that's going to struggle switching against things like Luna, Maushold, and Braviary. And if Annihilate's got enough boost on Rage Fist, it's not going to want to take that. It's not even going to want to take on Specs Chi-Yu. Like, nothing is going to save to deal with this roster. It's clear that this team is less concerned with outlasting opponents, and more concerned with just shattering defensive doors and so on. So, though it clearly isn't hard for offense, I will be judging it as an offense team. And that's probably a good thing for Alex, because it means we get to overlook what I would call horrible defensive synergy. I've only briefly mentioned it, but Fairy, Water, Ice, Steel, and certain flying types completely transfer defensively. I mean, there is switches for these Pokemon. But, yeah, I will come back to this a little bit later, but that's not what I'm going to focus on, because I don't believe that's what Alex uses. What this roster is really about is the offensive synergy and making life as difficult as possible to opponents. I expect Alex will look to build off the natural synergy within this roster, and as a result this roster could risk being a bit predictable, but even if it is predictable, it is incredibly dangerous, which is really good. There isn't too much more to say offensively about this team's defense plan, because it is pretty straightforward, but there are a few things that pique my interest on this team. I think it's interesting how, except for Arroyo, both his team's Terra Captains are defensive. In a roster that values getting free turns and offensive output as much as this one, I would have personally liked to see Terra Chi-Yu or Annihilate or Ursaluna. Nothing wrong with defensive Terra Captains, but I just think it's a missed opportunity of this roster. An issue I also have with this roster is a trap that some offensive drafts can easily fall into, where they drop lots of Pokemon to capitalize on game momentum, but very few who themselves build the momentum. That is the main thing that held this team back. No use to try and make use of momentum if you don't have it, right? You've got plenty of Pokemon like Chi-Yu and Ursaluna who are devastating with momentum tools, but you've not got those momentum tools. How are you going to build the momentum? You need stuff like double switches to make use of them, and they're somewhat unreliable, especially with low default like this roster has. Rocks are going to be a problem. Yeah, so this roster lacks a defensive pivot, a steel type. I know Galvanac is Terra Steel, but a proper steel type, right? A steel type, and also a way of building momentum. So I cannot recommend enough this roster picks up Jirachi, which I believe is undrafted at the moment, in place of something like Screamtail or one or two other later ones. I can't recommend that strongly enough. Another fast revenge killer would be good too, but Jirachi would make a world of difference in this roster. This roster will absolutely demolish stall teams, although unfortunately for Alex there are none in the division. But against opposing fast offense, I think this roster could really falter, despite the incredibly powerful Pokemon that are present here. I am rating the roster as a whole, so... God, I've done this one well fast. I'm going to do this way faster than I did before. Damn. I say I'm rating the draft as a whole, not the individual Pokemon, and so I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. I'm sorry that I did go over this one quite fast, but the fact of the matter is, we all know that Chi-Yu, Annihilate, and Ursaluna are going to be ridiculously powerful. We know that Altaria is a great setup sweeper. We know that Tatsugiri's got a great typing. We know that Braviary can break and sweep, you know. I was mainly looking to point out that while the Pokemon on this roster are ridiculously powerful, top 2 got banned from OU actually, just the other day. While they are ridiculously powerful, they are not synergizing well enough, in my opinion. A couple of defensive pivots would go such a long way here, but alas, I did give it a 5 out of 10. Next up is, oh, it's one of our mods. Wonder which one it's going to be. I'm going to bloody find my notes real quick. I'm joking, it's not dramatic. Sabirus. As I say, one of the lovely OBS mods, and their team, though confusing in direction, in my personal view, has a lot of good pieces that can lead to success. I've got to understand, I do not understand the draft order very much at all. Round 1 Cyclozar is understandable, given that it's a new Pokemon, everyone knows what the Shed-Tail is, Sabirus probably wants to try it. Round 2 more, completely fair. Round 3 Tornadus? Given that Torn normally goes undrafted full stop, I don't get it. I do not get it. And from there, honestly including Tornadus, this roster is just filled with mid-tier Pokemon. Middle tier, with your, 10 to 14 points, couple of 8s and 9s I hope. That can certainly work for the record, but I don't know if I would agree with the direction the roster went in, considering it starts with Cyclozar and Mega Ball, which is certainly a great pair. There are a number of good duos in this team, for instance. Shed-Tail is amazing support for both Mega and Tornadus, because both of them really appreciate the free turn that Sub gives them, as well as the status immunity and the ability to take advantage of walls. However, after this, Sabirus doesn't draft any more Pokemon to take advantage of Shed-Tail's offensive capabilities. I say after this, I haven't missed more a while, but I will go back to more. This is upsetting to me, because this roster is quite slow, and given that the fastest one is Cyclozar, that means that the fastest sub-recipient from Cyclozar is base 111 in Tornadus. I believe it's base 111 anyway, I could be making a fool of myself. And for me that is a bit of a waste of potential, because sub-passing into incredibly fast, dangerous threats is amazing because it kills revenge killers, even against your revenge killers. Also, I would have liked to see something like a Dragon Dancer. They love substitution, right? Because that free turn to get the DD off is massive. It's absolutely massive. All they don't even have to dance then, they can just fire off an attack. That's really huge. And the thing is, when you're allowing your sub-recipients to be revenge killed easily, you're not making full use of Shed-Tail, in my opinion. The roster has 3 revenge killers total, which again you might disagree with. They're Tornadus, Scarf Shocks, and Scarf Fire. We'll band it up. 4 Scarfs on a Shed-Tail team is not ideal to me. And you may be thinking, but Shinrai, there's sticky web support. I didn't mean to say it so condescendingly. Sorry. You may be thinking there is sticky web support, what's the big deal? Masquerade is not effective enough web support to facilitate this team consistently, right? The webs are going to be removed, and then Masquerade is probably going to be dead at the point that they are removed. So it may give an advantage early on, but I would be surprised to see webs last throughout the full game. Especially since this roster does not have a default Punisher, like Gyarados or King Gambit. Tornadus does have Defiant, but it's not the same as Gyarados or King Gambit, It's just not the same. And no Goldango or something like that either. But yeah. DOD is an amazing Cyclozar partner. I really like that. It is a momentum machine with hazards, teleport, status options, and can set the stage wonderfully for the Shed-Tail bullshit. Because Shed-Tail does one thing really well, and it's force switches. It does that better than almost anything else. And so when you have spikes and rocks up, you're going to punish those switches really hard, because people run boots on rock weak Pokemon all the time. They don't tend to run boots on rock resistant Pokemon that are vulnerable to spikes, So those Pokemon in particular are the ones you can really punish with spikes from DOS, which I really like. Also, you've got U-Turn, Torn, and Quackball and stuff like that. But then you've got Dio paired with Umbreon, who is a momentum soak. Unless you want to run Baton Pass every week, which you could, plausibly. But Umbreon more often than not is Foul Play, Status Move, Wish Protect. Right? You can run Moonlight, but Wish is one of the things going for Umbreon in this team. Mawile loves the Wish. Cyclozar loves the Wish, Because Wish You may think Cyclizar's got regen, but if you want to Wish with Umbreon and switch into Cyclizar, you can take most hits on the way in, heal them off with the Wish, and then pass a sub. That can really allow you to get out of those tough situations. But yeah, Umbreon is then paired with Sableye, which seems unusual to me. I think that Sableye will likely never come. I can't see a situation where it would, apart from something very niche. Amoonguss to me is better suited to the Sun team than Umbreon, though, because Spore allows for 3 set passes, and Spore's an incredible offensive on a team like this, which could be game-ending. I think Sandy Shocks was a pretty good backup as a mid-tier attacker. Its stabs are incredibly good, dealing with the electrics, flyings, water, steals that irritate Morwell and Quackable. And yeah, I know I haven't mentioned it yet, but Morwell is an amazing recipient of the sub itself, as it loves not having to cut down its own HP with the sub, and it loves not having to run sub in the first place. Sub is a really common option for Morwell because it lets you scout switches and use the right move on the switch. And also blocks T-Wave and whatnot. But not having to run sub is amazing, because Morwell with sub is normally sub, play rough, sucker punch, and then something else. Or, you know, knock off. And if you want to run Ironhead, you can, but you can't for SD, and you can't for Fire Fang for your sizzles and all that stuff. Sub is huge for that. So, yeah, I really like sub pass with Morwell. But this roster is very weak to strong U-turns with hazards up. I've put, although it's not terrible, the removal, in my opinion, is fairly weak. Excuse me. You've got Defog Masquerain, which we're not even going to talk about. Because if Masquerain is on the field, it's putting up webs, and if it's defogging, then it's getting rid of its webs. So, you know, and it's not going to stick around long enough to be able to do that multiple times. Then you've got Colossal for spin, Quackle for spin, and Tornadus. Oh, and Cyclizar for spin, but Tornadus for defog. Which is, you know, there's a lot of options, but none of them love being forced to run it. A spin like Cyclizar doesn't want to waste time spinning most of the time, it wants to just shut down. So, yeah. Yeah, it relies, I'm saying everyone here is, it relies on rapid spin more than I suspect Survirus might have liked. And looking at it, a team spamming U-turn with Rocks Up could do serious damage, if not beat this team, using that strategy alone. You know, U-turn with Rocks Up, U-turn with Spike Up, once you knock off the Taunt especially. This roster is difficult for me to judge because the strong parts are very strong, but for me the weak parts are just not, they're not overcame enough, right? And I don't really understand the thought process behind parts of the team, which is why I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. And as I do give this a 5 out of 10, I want to say now, I give a 5 out of 10 to Alex as well, and I'm going to say now because in this room. 5 is my benchmark. I'm not going through the team and saying, oh, I'm going to tell them, like, oh, this feels like a 4, this feels like a 5. The teams start at a 5, and they go up if they're more positive, if, you know, with like a positive point, and they'll go down with negative points, right? So, yeah. Anyway, after this is one that's gonna probably upset a person or two. Here we go. Ben Carbs. Now, who on earth let this guy get bundled on Dragon? This was the hardest team for me to place, right? The perfect 1-2 punch of wall-breaking, sweeping, you know, it's brutal. And it's backed up by Moth, Cleaver, Melmetal, Moltres, G. It's clear this is a fast-paced offensive. And something that I am thinking now, in hindsight, is that it might have been worthwhile to, not worthwhile, I maybe should have placed this team on. The only reason is, I still agree with the rating I gave it, but the fact of the matter is, Iron Bundle alone rips apart probably about 80% of the rosters. There is only 2 or 3 that can feel totally safe against Bundle. And that means Bundle is going to be absolutely brutal every week. And so even though synergy-wise, typing-wise, quality of Pokemon-wise, I agree with my rating, I maybe should have put it higher. But yeah, I'll get going. This roster has a lot of good traits for a fast-paced offensive team, and it supports its biggest threats really well. The offensive core of this roster is about preparing for a D9 sweep and setting the perfect conditions for it, which is obviously great. Cleavor is a fantastic Pokemon in teams like this, since you don't want to be wasting turns setting up stealth rock when you could be attacking. But Cleavor lets you get the best of both worlds, allowing Ben, sorry, I'm looking at another monitor whilst it's up. Allowing Ben to get rocks early, also threaten the most common defense type, which is flying. These rocks are absolutely essential for teams like this, not just for chip damage, but to break sashes, which is slightly underrated, I think, because sashes are a really, really good way to set up these kinds of teams. When rocks up, you can't do it, unless you set sashes out. I don't think anyone drafts out, so Dragonite naturally will struggle with opposing Donkey Fairy types, as well as Ghost types that can stop its Terra Normal E-Speed, yes. But then you've got Moth and Melmetal, which are a duo that no Fairy type can do, absolutely none. And they're both amazing wargamers. Moth pivots really, really well, and can force in Pokemon for Bundle to abuse, namely Boggy Grounds, Waters, and I don't know why I've written grasses. Moth clearly does not make grasses. The Ghost type issue isn't solved single-handed by these two, but Moltres G handles it pretty well, while also acting as a great breaker slash shrinker itself. All of this allows for D9 to set up a nigh uncounterable sweep with its obscenely powerful Extreme Speed. However, and I think it's coming, this moment comes to base together last time. However, despite all of the numerous excellent points I've just listed, it's also not particularly difficult to see where this roster could fall flat in certain matchups. Despite Cleavor acting as a good lead, it's by no means a great lead. It's not all that fast, it lacks taunt and screens, and it lacks a way to reliably set the tempo for its team while guaranteeing a free switch-in, such as Memento or Explosion. Now, I understand that Cleavor may not have been drafted with this role in mind, but with highly aggressive rosters such as this one, a lead or two like Azelf, one cross-out which I mentioned earlier, or Mew, can really go a long way in making sure you start on momentum and maintain it. That is a little bit more hyper-offensive, but I did want to note it because it could be something really valuable for this team. And this team could be really dependent on getting a good lead matchup, which is not reliable, without a dedicated. This leads me to the second key issue, which is what happens when this team loses momentum. Because this roster is crammed full of mons that capitalize on momentum and do big damage to set up, but only Rotom Wash or Risky Prediction is capable of snatching momentum back from the opponent's line. Because you may be thinking, oh, Bundle, let's flip turn. But the thing with Bundle is you're not switching into stuff if you can help it, or switching into attacks. You're forcing a switch, and then if you know they're going to go to something that Bundle can't hurt very much, you just flip turn. Right? It's an offensive thing. You'll flip turn on the wall to get in your wall break on Melmetal, for example. But yeah, this is not helped out by the fact that the team is, I think, quite vulnerable to Voltage now. Now that might be a little bit controversial because Codsai's right there. But Codsai itself is a momentum black hole, should it get knocked off or burned. And Codsai can be overwhelmed fast. That said, it does have spikes. It does have spikes, which is amazing. It does have toxic spikes, which is really, really good at this team once we have a slightly longer game. But yeah, this roster also does have a true Draco resist, as Melmetal's core special defense and very common ground and fire coverage on Dragon types. That means that Melmetal's not really a switcher, in my view. These downsides barely matter if momentum is maintained, but that is a huge if, because losing momentum against the wrong kind of threat like Iron Valiant or Zygarde or Patini or Paladin could result in the Pokemon getting sacked every time, right? And that's just not reliable. This roster certainly has potential to do very well due to the incredible potency of the bundled D9 combo, but the whole time Ben uses this, he's going to feel like he's walking a tightrope, always one misstep away from losing a Mon or more. And that is why I gave it a 6 out of 10. The offensive threat is so good, which is what pushed this up, but yeah, I gave it a 6 out of 10 for the reasons I just said. That one's probably going to be a bit controversial, but yeah, I'm just giving my honest opinion. In 9th, we have Joshua. Now, Joshua drafted a pretty bulky team with elements that I actually really enjoy. It's a generally quite slow, bulky roster that packs great offensive potential, good revenge killing options, decent set variety, and a number of mons that force prep pretty effectively, which is all fantastic traits. There's also a Lots of synergy that I really appreciate about this roster, such as Mega Gallade, Weavile, and Nidoking, covering each other's weaknesses pretty effectively while offering a blend of wall-breaking, sweeping, and hazard support. I think the bulk, particularly the offensive bulk, if that makes sense, of this roster is probably the best thing about it. Offensive bulk is something I'm a sucker for, as you will see later on. Zapdos is a really good offensive-defensive Pokemon, and it pairs nicely with P2 in particular, due to the really good shared bulk and Zapdos' ability to take on fighting types of P2, but also Swampert and Nidoking with the rock types. So, I said that the wrong way around. Swampert and Nidoking will take rock types with Zapdos, you get the picture. Orthron is a decent ground type, but its terrible special bulk means that it can't take Ice types reliably, Ice type moves, the Zapdos or Fairy type moves for Gallade and Weavile, so I don't love it as a steal here, given how much of the top threats are weak to Ice and Fairy. In fact, it is the only resistance to Ice, I think, on the whole roster. And is it the only Fairy resist too? It's the only Fairy resist by Nidoking. So, yeah, Orthron's going to have to do a lot with regards to those two types, because they are very common types. And I think it could struggle with that. The hazards are appreciated though, and also I wanted to say that the nature of Orthworm is that it can only likely shed tail once a day, and after that it's pretty defensively inept due to the lack of variety of hazards are certainly appreciated though. Although actually I suppose you can run Citrus and maybe you can get a second one off, but you know, it's not something that's going to be a totally dependable strategy. Aromatisse and Decidueye are strange to me. Because on the one hand, I totally understand the need for many of the positive traits they provide. Aromatisse in particular, because Aromatisse is a fairy, it's a wish passer, it provides even more backbone to the team. Decidueye is a grass type with passable defenses, and this roster was desperate, and to be honest, it is desperate in general, for a Pokemon that can switch into grounds and waters with ease and threaten them back. Because nothing else on this roster does that. Plenty of things can threaten one or the other, but nothing loves switching into them while also threatening them. You know, Zapdos switches to grounds, but doesn't threaten them that hard. P2 can switch into a lot of waters, but doesn't threaten them that hard. Decidueye does double duty, which is really, really useful. Bottom two mons are pretty useless, in my opinion. It's working too close to Mike, by the way. I don't know how large a pickup they're moving, because it's sometimes a problem. I've moved it away from you a bit, hopefully it'll be better. But yeah, I'd say the bottom two mons I think are a bit useless. Turtonator is a very, very niche bring. It's based at 30 something speed, so even with a Shell Smash it's not very fast. But if it does sweep someone with a Shell Smash, I will happily eat my words. Happily. The trouble with the bottom four Pokemon on this roster is that they all, to varying extents, although I'm now tempted to exclude Aromatisse here, but they all to varying extents perform the same function as something else, but are outclassed. But yeah, as I said, there is a case for Aromatisse due to its fairy type and Wish, but given that Gallade, Zapdos, Weavile, and Nidoking are coming basically every week, Polygon 2 is probably going to be the first slot a lot of the time, where do you fit Aromatisse? You know? For me it's too similar to P2 for them to both be effective on this roster. Maybe some weeks one will come, other weeks the other will, but for me that's an inefficient use of the right? Aromatisse is not needed alongside P2, Zapdos, and Orthworm. Although I will happily say that Orthworm does love the so as a Swampert, we'll get on to Swampert, because yeah, I'll get on to Swampert. Turtonator, Special Breaker plus Sweeper. Oh wait, no, I skipped some things. The other three, yes, the other three, not Aromatisse, are never likely to come over other mons on the roster, and they don't provide anything that another teammate cannot replicate without providing more for the team as a whole, with the sole exception of like ground and water switching and I mentioned, etc. But Turtonator is a Special Breaker and Sweeper, but Nidoking, for example, is a Special Breaker, Hazard Setter, Tank, Scarfer, and more. Decidueye is outclassed by Weavile and Gallade on the ST sets, outclassed by both of them, and Nidoking is a Wall Breaker, leaving its only real uses Plot and Scarf, which itself aren't terrible, but the amount of matchups where you can bring a 70 base speed Master Plot user is so limited. So it's arguably just Scarf you have left with it. I even have this issue with Swampert to an extent, because Swampert is a terrific mon, and it does fit with the first three, but I think Nidoking fits with the first three better. and to bring both serves more to double up on weaknesses than anything else. I get it's Terra Water, so it's not technically a ground type, but Terra Water is just a worse typing for Swampert. The Water ground typing is so much of what makes Swampert good. So yeah, I really don't agree with that. With that Terra Water build Swampert. I don't agree with Swampert at all, to be quite honest. I've written here, I didn't spend a long video about this, so don't take this gospel, but I've written here that I actually think Suicune could be decent this roster with Swampert. Although I will admit that losing a rocker is never good. I actually don't mind the fact there's only 2 defaulters in this roster, being Decidueye and Zapdos, because Zapdos is such a reliable defogger, you don't always need another one. And the same could be said for Hazard setting. Though, of course, forcing Nidoking to run Hazard isn't always the best set, you've still got Swampert and Orthworm with backup. Which, you know, will mean that if you're desperate to not run Hazards on Nidoking, you can run level 1 without losing that much. I still think it's not efficient to bring Swampert and Nidoking, but... what I do mind, though, is the pivoting. The Zapdos baits in grounds and U-turns into Weavile. Love that, take one off the list, brilliant. That's how Weavile can get entry, because Zapdos beats Pokemon that Weavile exploits, right? But if Weavile can't beat it, then chances are going to need it. Happy days. The only other useful pivot option for this team, however, are Swampert, Decidueye, and P2. These are mons that I do not think will be staples on the team. I think one of them will probably count this second, but you'll never have more than one of them, right? I wouldn't have thought. Maybe you'll bring P2 and Swampert once or twice, but you know. Pert might be, as I say, if I don't understand. Pert is when it's Terra Water, it's technically not level ground. I mean, I've got my notes in a slightly bad order here, you know. This means, by the way, that it is extremely plausible to me to come to every given matchup with Mega Gallade, Zapdos, Weavile, Nidoking, Orthworm, and then something else. And that means you have 1, maybe 2 pivot weaknesses. And given how much Nidoking and Orthworm both love Wish support every week, you might forced into running not just default Zapdos, but default U-turn Zapdos. This is where I'm slightly reluctant to take back what I said earlier. Well, I don't mind the 2 defaults, because I don't mind Zapdos as a reliable default, unless I'm told, but you don't want your Pokemon to be pigeonholed into the same set every single time. Because those last 2 moves from Zapdos, they can be Voltage Hurricane, they can be Hurricane U-turn, they can be T-Bolt U-turn, whatever. But it is still limiting it, right? Which I don't love, because yeah, it's incredibly exploitable and puts way too much pressure on Zapdos' shoulders. It's doing far too much for me, and if it gets toxic or KO'd early in the game, this team could really struggle to fall apart. And I think even if it gets knocked off, you know, if it gets knocked off, and it's toxic, and then rocks go up, gee, that Zapdos is not going to get rid of the hazards easily. Certainly not consistently. I also forgot to mention though, this team is one of the few that doesn't fold to the Kyurem bundle combo, because it has P2. So, good job. Kyurem is of course a bit of Dragon Dance, but you got Orthworm for a Dragon Dance set. So, you know, that's pretty good. Yeah, there are some parts of this team that I really like, namely the top 3 plus Nidoking. I really do love that, those 4. But it feels like the rest of the team is made it feels like the rest of the team was made a little absent-minded, and for me that is a 6 out of 10. Right, let's cut. I'll be back with you in a sec. Cut over, let's keep going. Next up we have Magnus. Now, Magnus has drafted a classic balance roster, and to be honest, I have no idea how he managed to win the first game. That's just Rampage. This roster is likely to bring that first 4 every single week, but the something I like is that it's not required to bring all 4 of them, because the team doesn't fall apart without any one of them. If you take any of these 3 and make them a trio, they're a really effective trio. But with all 4, it's really, really solid. I guess there's Orphini Chansey make up a really good defensive core, not easily broken out of outside of a few niche attackers, like, you know, that team full of wall breakers we saw earlier. And then the holes that remain are neatly patched by Lando T and Skeledirt, and don't forget Wish Chansey. Wish Chansey is really nice. hazard control is imperative for a good balance team, in my opinion, and Magnus has that with two exceptional defoggers in Lando and Latios. Oh, not two. I'm not talking about. Oh, am I an idiot? Hazard control, hazard setting is incredibly useful, and that's why I wrote the two exceptional setters are Lando and Chansey, as well as a good third option, Nihilego. Excuse me. Nihilego also opts for T-spikes, which Magnus could run into trouble with when he's pairing with Misty terrain, but for the most part, T-spikes are really nice on balance. The hazard removal options are also excellent, with Mega Scizor, Fini, Lando, and Latios all being really good defoggers, and I shouldn't expect Magnus will ever struggle to get removal on at least one Pokemon every single week. Now I'm looking at it, in terms of how do you get it that late, round 7 Skelegurge, because I did put this in the order that it was drafted. Round 7 Skelegurge after round 6 Pangoro. Also important for balance is defensive turned offensive potential. Bulky Pokemon on balance need to be able to threaten to retaliate against the opponent, and not only can the top 4 plus Skelegurge do this very well, but this team also has a lot of setup options for increased matchup flexibility, as well as pivoting options to allow for reliable positioning. The Pokemon on this team also generally have pretty decent coverage, so as I say, you can really tailor-make this team every single week. You're rarely going to run the same set 2 weeks in a row anyway, except maybe Chansey. I only have a couple of small criticisms to this team. Well, one small one and one a bit bigger one. The first is that the low tiers do not contribute much to the roster at all, and any contributions they make, I think, are going to be a bit forced. Pangoro and Bolton are both fine Pokemon on the right roster, but Pangoro in particular I feel doesn't really do anything here. Bolton at least has a great speed stat and Volt Switch, which I think is its reason why it will come to games, despite being pretty low tier. It also has surprisingly good bulk up sets, but neither Pangoro or Bolton really do much for me on this roster. The second issue is that while this roster has plenty of Pokemon that can be threatening while defensive, and also out-and-out ones like Chansey, I worry that this roster's offenses are a little predictable. Latios and Nihilego, for example, have quite a few overlapping checks, and the roster is generally pretty slow. So you're also forcing a Scarf on Nihilego, Fini, Lando, and Latios. And that's not inherently terrible, they're all great Scarfers, but it's not something you want to be forced to have, you know? This roster would love a super fast Pokemon as well. I'm not sure if this roster could have ever really gotten to like Zero Aura as well, but it would have been nice. What am I looking at? Only 4 Pokemon likely to come every week have base 85 speed or above. That was the point I was going to make. 4 Pokemon. That being Fini, Lando, Latios, and Nihilego. Bolton makes it 5, but I don't know, it's still very slow to me. And Latios hitting 350 speed as the fastest Pokemon not Bolton means that there's lots of attackers that can not only run Adamant, but use their speed to get endless opportunities against this team. Chenpao, Zero Aura, Mega Lopunny, Iron Valiant, Mega Diancie, Victini, Sneasler, they're all really scary for this team. So while this roster can be a very effective balance tool, it needs to be piloted in such a way that these threats do not get space to devastate the team. Because, yeah, that is something that could very plausibly happen. I mean, if you look at the list that I just read out, most of them can be reasonably effectively warded in some way, shape, or form, but something like Victini, there's nothing on this roster that will Victini. You need to hold Victini with a combination of them. That's never fun. Your best bet's probably Skelegurge, and even then, I don't know how much damage you create something with respect to Blue That said, I do like this team, even though it has a lack of what I'm going to refer to as a wow factor. You know, I think it'll be very consistent. I think it'll never lose by much. I would have thought the worst you'd see from this team is maybe a 3-0 or something, if it's, you know, not too defensively built. But yeah, despite the flaws, I am giving it a 6.5 out of 10. Moving swiftly onwards then, because I want to get this video not obscenely long. It was 2 hours last time I recorded it, I want to get it shorter. Next up, we have another mod. Wow. No we don't. I looked at the wrong one. It's Whismur. Oh, I skipped someone. Yep, whoops. My bad. Let's move on to Whismur's notes. Yeah. Wisma is not the first player we've seen draft a fast offense team, but we've also seen that drafting such a team is not as straightforward as you might think. They have done themselves a massive favour in this regard, though, by drafting Tapu Koko, which is arguably the best offensive pivot in the format, with its decent bulk, amazing speed, access to U-turn Volt Switch, as well as great alternate options like Bruce, Defog, Calm Mind, and the option to go physical. Nature's Madness also known as a move. They follow Koko up with Sneasler, which itself is a great cleaner and wall breaker in one slot. My first thought with Sneasler looking at this roster is it's a shame that it isn't paired with a Hex user somewhere, because Sneasler spreads status with absurdities, and yeah, Hex user could have used that well. It has Toxic Smokes too, which I'll get back to in a second. Yeah. That's not the biggest thing, that's far from a big point. It is just simply something I noticed, and I'm reading my thoughts right now. Moving on though, we have this roster's defensive trio of Slowking, Gliscor, and Ordino. Now, Slowking and Gliscor are amazing defensive pivots themselves, and Ordino is a really easy stopgap to most non-fighting types, and provides very valuable wish passing to let its offensive teammates take trades. You know, if Koko takes 90% from something to knock something out, Ordino can then recover it later off a good double switch or something like that, and you know, get Koko back in the game. It's not needed so much for its walls, because its walls have such amazing recovery with double regen and poison heal, but it's still a really good option to have. Katana as well is the beneficiary of it. Sneasler not so much, because it's not got as good bulk or defensive typing, but it's still pretty decent. Where was that to? Iron Jugglers and Katana are this roster's breakers, their main goal being to blow open holes for either Sneasler or Koko to abuse. Past this, however, I don't see any real usage for any of the other ones, that being Deblade, Arctivish, Mega Absol, and Rapidash. Rapidash is never going to come over Sneasler or Katana. Even for the inevitable Mega Scissor matchup, which we just went past, Fire Punch Sneasler will be preferred to, as the Mega... as the Mega Scissor team hacks Fiend. So Rapidash isn't even coming to that. So Rapidash is, you know, fast fire offense. It doesn't do anything to this roster. It feels like it's there for the speed tier, and that's it. Mega Absol, in my opinion, this might be a little controversial, is one of the worst Megas around in terms of value for points. It's normally around 7 or 8, and I think it's nowhere near good enough for that. It'll struggle as a special attacker in this roster due to its sharing the roster with Jugulis, and its physical sets are once again inferior to Katana and Sneasler. You know, the Katana comparison also extends to Deblade, who doesn't even have Magic Bounce or a really powerful Sucker Punch to boast. You know, that Absol does. So Deblade I can't see coming either. Arctivish I do at least understand because they're pairing with Slowking and Chilly Reception, but in my opinion, Arctazol would be just much better, because Arctazol... Yes, continue watching. Arctazol would be much better because of Koko's Electric Terrain. It can abuse terrain, which is amazing, frankly. Where was I up to? Speaking of terrain, yes. Jugulis massively benefits from the terrain, and I'm afraid that without terrain, Jugulis can seem a tiny bit lackluster. With terrain, it's excellent. So I really like that. This roster is, unfortunately, completely and utterly wiped by the freeze dry users of Curum and Bundle, but I'm inclined to give it, not a pass, because it is obviously wiped by them, but A, they're two of the hardest Pokemons to wall around, and B, Ordinary probably does a respectable job, so I'm not going to go too hard on that. But yeah, the defensive utility and recovery, momentum recovery on this roster, I think are just good enough that this roster will work out. Slowking, Gliscor, Ordino is really good at just dealing with the vast majority of threats and pivoting it. They're not eternal walls, they can be broken through with sheer power and setup, but that's not really how this roster is trying to go about things. It's trying to take a hit with Slowking, Gliscor, Ordino, pivot out to who have you, any of the 4 really powerful threats, and then you work. So it does the job for you. I do think the hazards are a little on the weak side. Gliscor being the only rocker, and also the only defensive defogger, which is... You got Koko and Cart as well, but Gliscor's got a lot of weight on its shoulders in that respect. But this roster does actually not like hazards too much, especially self-block. Webs would be a nightmare, so, you know, be careful against webs. But for the most part, it does not mind it too much at all. And Toxic Spike's access from new start, as I mentioned earlier, will be very useful at forcing down the targets, in my view. I gotta be honest though, I don't get the Terra effects. I do not understand the Terra effects. Because Grass Coco makes a bit of sense and lets you lure in and beat the ground types, which is, you know, fine. But ground type Jugular seems like a bit of a wasted opportunity to me, you know? I mean, granted, I would have liked to something like Fairy type Coco, but this works too. Also Electric can do tons of damage. I mean, Grass is fine. I don't mean to go back to that. Ground type Jugulars I don't really get, because the Stab Earth power is nice, and it lets you hit Steel, Fire, Rock types and all that, and that is great. But you already hit them respectively with Dark Stab. You know, you don't need to Terastallize to beat those types most of the time. I also think Jugular Skin and ground typing isn't that beneficial defensively, because yeah, the Electric Rinse is nice and the Rock Resistance is nice. It's you know, it's not really going to be like, oh, are you Terra Iron Jugulars to check this Pokemon that Gliscor doesn't for some reason? Like, it doesn't really exist. So, you know, at least when I talked about Swampert and Terra Water earlier, on the same team as a Toxapex, there's an argument that, oh, I'm against this physically offensive Pokemon as a ground type, and I need something to deal with it. Pex can't, Hurt can, right? I can get that. And on that roster, it makes sense exactly as it. On this roster, I don't really agree with it so much. Yeah, and Fairy types, by the way, don't really mind you becoming ground type. I can't remember if Jugulars gets Flash Cannon, but if it does, Terra Steel would have been decent. Helps with the ice stuff, helps with, what's it called, Fairy types, makes you electric neutral, so Terra Steel, in my opinion, probably would have been better than that. But I still kind of like ground. Yeah, it's for this reason that I personally think Fire or Steel would have been better timing for Jugulars, I've written here, or just Flame, you know, to really nuke targets with Hurricane. I mean, Specs Jugulars is probably the best set, I think. And its Specs Hurricane is ridiculous in Electric Surge anyway, so getting a Terra Flying on top of that would have been just stupid. Nevertheless, though, I think despite the team having, in my view, some wasted team slots, and there being issues with the team itself, I do think it's solid. Coco Cart is a really potent duo, and when there's Pokemon that can, when the Pokemon like Coco Cart can retreat to a regen Poison Heal core when it's needed, you've just set yourself up for success, as long as you keep momentum well. As a fast-paced offense team, I've given this a 6.5 out of 10. Let's have a look at who is next. Who was this? Was this Tom's Wismers? Yeah, up next is Tom's Sprite. I spoiled it, sorry. Let me find my notes on them. Line 190. Here we are. Right. Another lovely OBS mod we have here, and a bulkier roster as well. That's probably on the more offensive side of balance, is how I view it. Chien-Pao being drafted round 1 is not a surprise, and yeah, I say it Chien-Pao, I don't know if it's Chien-Pao, like Chien, like the French word for dog, you know? But, I don't know. Chien-Pao being drafted round 1 is not a surprise, and it's followed by a very familiar sight of Gloking plus Rillaboom. I do say Gloking, not Soaking G. I'll say Gyarados, I'll say Articuno, you know. I say Moltres G though for some reason, but anyway. This roster has a very heavy emphasis on physical offense, with the special attacking Pokemon in this roster being on the bulkier side, in Gloking, Togekiss, and Sylveon. The defensive combination of Gloking, Togekiss, and Mega Aggron I expect to be a really, really difficult one for opponents to face. Gloking itself is famously difficult to kill, and famously annoying to kill for a large amount of Pokemon, and has its few weaknesses patched up very neatly by its teammates. Mega Aggron can consume basically any physical attacker that will threaten it. Rillaboom provides cover against Earthquake and some extra recovery. And Aggron and Togekiss are both great switches to knock off. In return, Slowking will devour even special fire moves for Aggron, and even provides pivoting for Rillaboom because it has Genie Reception now. Which, if you're wondering, yes, everyone knows it sets hail as pivots, but I did some testing, it still works even if hail is already up. It just doesn't add more hail turns. So it is effectively teleport. for Glowking's purposes. And also if he wants to fit Weather Ball and stuff. I don't know if Tokius gets Weather Ball, I think it might. I think Gastrodon might too. And Chen Pao gets a defense boost, so, you know, it's a decent little move here. The Ghost weakness is notable within this team so far, but between Silvally and Chen Pao, I think that this team will be okay. Though there isn't much defensive pivoting, I really like the defensive synergy on this roster. And the fact that even the bulky Pokemon are very capable of doing big damage themselves, which reduces the need for the offensive Pokemon to take unnecessary damage early game. You know, early game breaking, not breaking per se, but chipping away at the opponent, statusing stuff, getting early damage off, can be done by Slowking, Gastrodon, Togekiss, Silvally, and not need to involve stuff like Chen Pao and Rillaboom levels to preserve its health, which is really good. Mega Aggron, of course, can do damage too as well. What was that to? Hazard control is pretty good here. The default options aren't terribly consistent. And I think this roster would benefit from a top tier defogger, because right now you're relying on, I believe it's just Silvally and Togekiss, off the top of my head. I didn't know that for some reason. But yeah, Silvally and Togekiss. But nevertheless, Aggron and Gastron are both very reliable rockers. So, you know. And also Gastron gets spikes or toxic spikes now. And Slowking gets toxic spikes. I didn't even mention Slowking gets toxic spikes. That's actually a massive plus for this team. So, yay, I missed that the first time. Turns out doing this, recording the fourth time, I'm still noticing things. I do have a few small criticisms for this roster. Though generally employed well, the grassy terrain is not entirely Gastrodon, and especially Mega Aggron, miss out on using Earthquake significantly. Although, I will say, Aggron gets high horsepower, as does Gastrodon, and Gastrodon gets special horsepower, so it's not a huge deal. The only bit of that I do think is a huge deal is that it means that Aggron is forced to use a contact move instead of Earthquake, which could be big because if you're going to try and deal with Aggron, a Rocky Helmet is not a bad idea. It will go quite a long way because of Aggron's lack of reliable recovery. I also think the low tiers are completely useless, to be honest. If I cannot see a way in which this roster brings Lumiose or Simisear, except as a joke. Given even opposing Pokemon like Mega Scizor, I'm bringing that again, can be handled with methods like Fire Punch, Aggron, Flamethrower, Glowking to an extent. I am curious to see how you feel like doing this Masters though. I really do want to see that do well, because it's funny. Another criticism I have is that Lycanroc Dusk arguably doesn't do anything with this roster. It outspeeds and KOs fire types, yes, which is nice, but I think everything else that it does is completely and utterly outclassed by either Chen Pao or I think this roster could have got something better for this slot, or use those points to pick up another low-tier tool like that. I really do get the fire type thing though, because, as I'm about to say in a second, fire types are a serious problem in this team in my opinion. If this team has a big weakness, as I go on to right opponents, it's fast, strong, physical attackers that don't care about the Glowking, right? Because Glowking is going to be the source of a lot of benefits. In particular, Zard Y, Lando I, Tapu Lele, others like that severely threaten this team, as all of them threaten to break through both Glowking and Aggron. Even Tapu Lele, I think I think a life or focus blast is like 60% to split F Aggron. So if you catch you with a couple of Psychics or a Psychic split F drop on the way in, you know, you're in trouble. And although you're probably going to run Side Shot for Glowking. But anyhow, this in my opinion is the roster's biggest weakness. And is the main way that opponents should seek to beat it. I'm not trying to give advice on team building because that's an entirely different kettle of fish, but yeah. That said, this roster does have a lot of positives, and I think it's going to frustrate opponents as they flail helplessly against this team's incredibly bulky backbone. It's a 6 out of 10 to me. I do quite like it. I think I've articulated that well. I'm off notes now. But yeah, I'm just having another look over it now. And I do think it's really nice. I think Mega Aggron, Glowking, Rillaboom is always going to be a decent combination, as long as Rillaboom doesn't get worse, because Grassy Glide has been nerfed recently. But yeah, up next, we're into the top 5, and I looked at my notes rather than before I was supposed to go. Find 455. Who could that be? I'll tell you now, it's King Bob. Now, this team, this bloody team. I do have to know this team is slightly outdated, as King Bob has picked up some transactions, so I will briefly talk about them at the end. But first thought when I saw this team was admittedly not a good one. You'll know that they get better because it's a Smith, but yeah. A Goldengo team with pretty mediocre, if not bad, hazard support. I thought this was going to be a good upgrade. But then I realised quite quickly that Goldengo's primary role is not as a hazard removal blocker. It'll do that for sure, and it'll do it well, but that's not its primary function. Because as it turns out, Goldengo is a fantastic partner for both Mega Lopani and Fraxure. So fantastic, I can't think of many better mons to pair Goldengo with. Bob's plan here is centered around these top three, as most drafts centered, bringing a unique feel to the offensive team that it is. I'm calling it that because this roster is clearly offensive, but I don't feel comfortable calling it bulky offense or fast-paced offense. It's somewhere in the middle. And I'm going to have a drink now, excuse me. God. How long have I been going for? I don't know, I think we're probably going to end up less than 2 hours, which is good. Yeah. A few teams in Fraxure Division, as I've already mentioned before, have a severe weakness to freeze dry, and of course Kyurem is part of the two big freeze dry users with Iron Bundle. Kyurem alone will therefore dismantle certain rosters in this division almost single-handedly. But if Kyurem has two weaknesses, well, three weaknesses I suppose, super bulky walls, fast counterattacks, and hazards. Enter Goldengo, who resists literally every single type that Kyurem is weak to, and threatens the fairies that want to check Kyurem with absolute ease. And it does this while blocking hazard removal, which allows Kyurem to sustain offensive pressure for later on, which is wonderful. When you know, maybe you got Specs Kyurem, they make a good prediction, they go Corviknight on your Earth Power. Normally that'd be like, oh, Rock's gone. Lost a load of progress. But with Goldengo, that doesn't have to be the case. You know, that is why Goldengo is great. Even if it's not defending hazard stat, it's more like defending hazard progress, which is, you know, it's pretty good still. Kyurem also has options to switch into Moltres against opposing steals, like Corviknight. I don't know why I assumed Goldengo couldn't switch into Corviknight, obviously it can. So runs bulk up a power trip or something, which is good. And can also go to Wheezing G if faced with a fighting type and Bob doesn't want to risk knockoff on Goldengo. Wheezing G can also use their free turns to set up T-Spite to make Kyurem even more potent. But switching into defensive walls and Goldengo won't help much if the opposing team is fast-paced offense, right? What does King Bob do when Kyurem can't hit the throw against a fast-paced team? He'll use one of the best anti-offense Pokemon available, that's right. He'll use Mega Lopani. Even without return, actually, wait, do we have return? I'm tempted to pull up the dog. I believe we actually do have return. Actually, I'm going to double check. Hang on, 1 second. Let's have a look, shall we? We'll look together. Where is it? National Dex Draft. The move's Hidden Power, Terrabast, and Pursuit of Band. Yeah, so we've got Return Legal, which is really good for Lopani. So yeah, Lopani is a huge threat, and as Return, which I didn't apparently know when I made this with these notes, but it does. So it's phenomenal at forcing out opposing speedy threats while U-turning to get in its allied Goldengo against a Fairy or Psychic type switch in. Happy days. Or Kyurem against a specially frail physical wall like Dondozo. Synergy. These first three are crammed with synergy, I think. Lopani also loves hazard support itself with the use turns around, chipping the opponent with both U-turn and hazard support with ease, before forcing the opponent back out again with Kyurem or Goldengo, and blocking those hazards from being removed with Goldengo. It is a brutal cycle that Bob has the potential to put his opponents through. Now, you've heard how much I love the top 3 mons, as well as certain supporting mons like Moltres and Wheezing G. However, this is where I must talk about some nuances. Because I do not see the purpose in drafting Mamoswine and Akira. I really don't. Every roster needs a ground type, yes, and I'm not counting stuff that's really because it's ground. But doubling up on ice types really doesn't make sense to me. A ground type that is self-rock neutral and can't take on loads of the types of ground types you want to be able to switch into, like steel types and binding types, that's not ideal to me, you know? I think it could have been something like Gligar or Seismitoad, which support your top 3 better than Mamoswine does, while still providing rocks and a ground typing, which is great. Something else I want to say is that the team, for a team that absolutely adores hazards being up, why are all of the hazard setters low tier mons? You know, Orbital, Stumpus G, Chestnut, and Mamoswine and Weezing as well. They're not top tier Pokemon. Only Mamoswine and Weezing are arguably even weak in weak out rings. And again, Mamoswine might not be because it's Pet Procure. You get me? I think Arcanine actually gets rocks as well, I'm not sure. But same story, it's an offensive Pokemon. It doesn't love being forced to hit rocks. I also think that Goldengo teams in principle should have at least one good spinner. Because Goldengo teams are all about protecting entry hazards, even though this one doesn't do it to the same extent, I still believe this is true. We're all about protecting entry hazards, and though this team isn't leaning into it that hard, fitting a spinner would allow you to relieve hazard pressure while keeping your own hazards up, which is, of course, fantastic. Knockoff is also something that's lacking from this team, which is significant to let you get rid of heavy duty boots. The only knockoff user at a glance is Mamoswine, so yeah, that's not ideal. Also, why are there so many typing types? You know, you got 2 grounds, 2 fires, 2 ices, 2 fightings, and 2 steel types. That's 5 typing double ups on a 10-mon roster, which is crazy. Yeah, I don't get that. I mean, it mainly serves a double up and weaknesses more than anything else. This roster has a really effective 3 to 5 that can come most weeks, but the remaining ones are total non-brainers to me. Or at least pretty mediocre. I might be being a bit harsh on Arcanine. Even then, Ultra supports the top 3 better, you know? I say I can't see there being many matchups where the optimal strategy is Arcanine and Moltres in the same team, or bringing Orbital over Weezing G, you know? The options are very limited past that first 3. And I'm a bit upset that there isn't a Dark type somewhere, but since Lopunny is a great knockoff absorber and can revenge kill basically every ghost, as well as the fact this team wants to keep a high pace anyway, I will allow it. This team has probably the best top 3 in the division. I cannot stress enough how much I like Goldengo, Megalope, and Kyurem. If there was good hazard, like strong hazard support, and maybe even a Wish Passer as well, I would really like this team. Moltres is great as well with it. Weezing G I think is a good option, but it's just missing 1 or 2 pieces that would have probably pushed it up to 2nd or 3rd. The first team is unfortunately untouchable. I adore the team first. But anyway, I'm going to do a quick awkward cut. I'll be back. And we are back. Sorry about that cut. We are moving on to 4th now with our boy Mega Mando. Now this is bulky offense. Here for a good time, a reasonably long time, not an especially long time. In my opinion, Dragapult is busted as fuck. It's probably one of the best Pokemon going. It's just an amazing Pokemon. And Great Tusk and Heatran are amazing support as they help deal with the dark fairy types that annoy Pult. Ooh, my chair's been very loud, excuse me. Yeah, it's obviously going to be a good thing for Pult. I mean, also they help deal with Steels. I don't know if they know the Steels, but Steel's going to annoy Pult a little bit. The offensive start has a strong backbone too, which helps with getting the offensive threats in repeatedly. The duo of Thundee and Dragapult will be seriously potent and bring out the best of Mega Abomasnow Pokemon, and Great Tusk, because Thundee in particular baits in grounds, baits in grounds, Pult baits in Steels and Darks, and Abomasnow abuses those grounds. Tusk abuses the Steels and Darks, which is really, really nice. Abomasnow also doesn't actually hurt its teammates anymore, thanks to him. So that's really good too. And it's also a Aurora Bell setting, if you want to go that direction, although Klefki's probably better at it. There are a few things to criticise however. This team is heavily reliant on Milotic for its longevity, as due to the relatively low amount of removal on the team and Heatran/Tusk's lack of recovery, Milotic is the only bulky Pokemon that won't find itself easy chip throughout most games. This is especially important as Milotic can be worn down through things like Flame Orb. You know, if you need to run Flame Orb something like a Mega Garchomp, which you very well could, you're going to be worn down donkeys fast. It's going to be incredibly difficult to keep Milo alive. With 8 recovers as well, This roster also hates freeze dry users. Curum wipes through this easily. Bundle wipes through this easily. Ironically, actually, Bundle's checked up on the okay like Mega Monster. That's probably the best check the Bundle using so far. I don't know if Bundle gets much coverage outside of its stabs, but yeah. But yeah, any ice type is really dangerous in this team, I think, because Heatran doesn't have amazing longevity, and Milotic has to handle lots of situations. And furthermore, ice types tend to have just coverage for I really don't have a lot to say about this roster, because everything I've wanted to say, I kind of put in there. Grafai, I don't really rate, to be honest. I'd love to be proved wrong, but I don't really rate it. Shuckle is okay as a hazard mon, but I worry about it being too much of a momentum sink. I don't mind Heatran because it is offensively threatening in its own right and can do so many things, and can be a Scarf or Specs user itself, as well as doing some things for death, with Taunt and Magnastorm and all that fun stuff. But yeah, it's a bit of a momentum sink for me, Shuckle. Tusk is more of an attacker than a bulky Pokemon, but it can of course be bulky. Klefki is hyper offensive if you want it to be. Klefki is emergency Thunder Wave if you want it to be. It's spikes. It's a lot of good stuff. And low kicks would make plenty of sense, except I don't get why it's terrible. For me, its best trait is its first impression. And for me, you go first impression and then run Sack Punch with it, using U-turn and then whatever in the last slot. But you know, I still think this is a pretty strong team. I still very much do not regret putting it forth. I just don't have a lot to say about it. And I think that's a good thing in the roster, because I looked at it and I thought, yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty obvious flaws in the lack of longevity, but yeah, it's pretty great. I say, this will be one of the most threatening rosters run in the early game, especially. But my concern is with this roster faltering in longer matches. That said, I'm still giving it a 7 out of 10. It's a good, solid roster. And now, we break into the top 3. And oh god, I'm messing around too badly with my notepad here. Here it is. Next up, we have Chris Reed. And no, not the roster I picked first, it's probably my favourite roster, right, of this, what's it called, of this division. Because it's very unique. It's very, very unique. I stayed on this roster for quite a long time before writing anything. And I eventually came to the conclusion that I do like this roster after running a ton of damage calcs and things like that, but I also see some big flaws. As usual, I looked at the top 2 or 3 mons to try and establish the team style. The reason that if your 5 most expensive Pokemon are fast offense, but the rest are Storm mons, you're probably still going to play a fast offense style, right? And the first 4 or 5 here certainly are interesting. They're very interesting. Tornadus Theory is one of the best Pokemon you can draft in Pokemon, and that has been for quite a few years now. And despite Gen 9's power creep, I expect that to remain the case in that dex format, where it keeps defaulting enough rifle happening. In my opinion, you can draft Tornadus on just about any kind of team, so it doesn't really give away what kind of team it is, so we'll move on for now. After that, we see round 2 Garchomp, which is kind of crazy, round 3 Cinderace, round 4 Scizor, and then a Azumarill. Round 4 Scizor is not that crazy, actually. I forgot this is Naddex, not Paldea Dex. If it was Paldea Dex, round 4 Scizor would be crazy, because it's like one of the only few good defaulters. But those 4, Chomp, Cinderace, Scizor, and Azumarill, are what Chris wants us to be looking at. And it's what he wants his opponent to be worried about. Basically, the reason why I think this team is so unique is because I think it's using a really, really interesting playstyle. And I am going to be keeping an eye on Chris' replays to see if he does play it like this, because I really hope he does, because it'll be really fun to see. It's an incredibly old school playstyle, and one that was probably at its best in Advanced, of all places, Gen 3. But I think this is physical offense, or a physical offense spam team. And to explain how I'm going to judge this team, I need to first explain what makes physical offense work. Because this is a very unusual style, you basically never see this. This may not even be what Chris Reed's going for, but this is the best rating I could give this roster. I'm judging it as this, and I actually love this, so I want to talk about this. Yeah, to explain the goal here is of these teams is to overwhelm the opponent's physical wall/checks by doubling and sometimes tripling up against them in order to break through. Most rosters are only going to draft 1 or 2 physical walls, right? Well, you're kind of playing the numbers. One of these guys will break through them, right? It's not quite like that. For example, Slowbro deals with Garchomp, Cinderace, and Azumarill in a vacuum, right? It can deal with any one of them. But if the Chomp decides to run a special Life Orb set with Draco Meteor, then it will do 60% to Fizz Def Bro, and an uninvested Earthquake will, still with the Life Orb obviously, will finish Bro off after Rocks. Right? I think, and there's no reason to run Spadef Bro unless you're making an incredibly hard read. You know? After that, Bro is gone, and Cinderace and Azu have not got a check, and can KO things left and right. This is the idea. Equally, Azumarill can bait Slowbro in, and Drellybum, Belly Drum on the switch, and this has a 25% chance to KO Slowbro even through a Cold Berry with knockoff. Or it could run Whirlpool Perish Song, and it can try and trade with Slowbro if it's not running Teleport, but of course if it is running Teleport in the set with Marks, I would recommend it. But it would allow Garchomp and Cinderace to Rampage, right? As a style, this is incredibly inconsistent and frankly quite shit on ladder, because it's basically matchup fishing. But in draft, I could see this plausibly working. And it's when you look at the rest of the roster after the top 5, then the pieces start to make sense as to why Chris chose them. And when you look at the roster with this whole physical offense thing in mind, you finally start to sort of see it. Firstly, the attackers. It's no coincidence that Chris chose 2 stab U-turn users for this team. There's basically no better moves found physical offense, as you either chunk the opponent for massive damage, or you draw in their physical ball to try and break it through. Secondly, you might wonder why Chris chose Scizor and Azu as his Terra users, instead of Garchomp and Torn, which are both amazing Terra users in their own right. The answer, which is what finally convinced me that this was physical offense spam, is the fact that the Terra types themselves are Scizor, Steel, and Azu Water, i.e. the types of their priority moves. This is so Chris can maximize his priority options, which lets him bludgeon the opponent's fast threats as hard as he possibly can without needing a choice scarf. This is so key, because an offense team like this does not want to be choice scarfing its Pokemon, because although it has got these 2 amazing U-turners, Pokemon like Garchomp and Azu do not want to be scarfed inactively. Garchomp's better, obviously, and Cinderace is plausibly a scarfer, but this team does not have a great scarfer outside of Chomp, and it so does not want to be scarfing its Pokemon all the time. Therefore, priority is super important, and also getting scale shots off the Chomp and whatnot. As a matter of fact, and this is what took me so long to really get an idea of this team, because I was calculating for ages, hopefully this works. Yes, it does. Oh, that's looking a bit bad. Let's get rid of them. Pretend we never saw them, which you never did. There's nothing there. If you look at the offensive one, that are between 16 and 19 points that have been drafted in Fractured Division, only 4 can safely avoid the 2 at KO from either Scizor or Azu. Right? What I've got you up here is the Pokemon and the calc from whichever one does more. Right? This is because despite this being fast-paced offense, there are plenty of very fast Pokemon out there, and Choice Scarfers that can outspeed the threat in this roster, which does not like running Choice Scarfers itself. But this roster has really heavily invested in priority. So, you know, you can really threaten this. I did put all count against Bulk plus offensive sets. Some things like Melmetal and Ursaluna are obviously going to have Bulk. But this is just to give you an idea, right? As I say, 9 out of 31 are O-code, which is crazy. 26 out of 31 are 2 KO'd, and Mega Garchomp is pushed over there if it takes stuff wrong. I've got on the right, it's a pretty good answer to a KO. So, you know, this is really good. And this is for Adamant Life Orb, Terra Steel Bullet Punch, or Banded Aqua Jet from Terra Water Acid. You could easily run Bandit Sizzle, and quite a number of these calcs go up. I don't know if many of them get turned from 2Ks to OKs. DOS might, but DOS also. But yeah, I'd say I've got my calcs Evan too. It's ridiculous power, and despite this, what am I even looking at here? Sorry, I've written absolute dumb shit. Yeah, despite this being fast-paced offense, I already said this thing about fast Pokemon Choice Scarfers that outspeed the this roster, which doesn't itself like running a Choice Scarf. Let's go back to the team here. The teams that Chris will bring every week are probably going to be Taunty, then at least 3 out of 4 of Chomp, Cinderace, Sizzle, and Azumarill, and then 2 fillers for the rest of his draft. When you look at the draft like that, certain picks make a lot more sense. For example, Uxie is a very bulky mon that can hang around, take powerful hits, knock things off, set up hazards and screens, and U-turn to get offensive threats in. All of those things are super important for enabling physical attackers. Because if you're going to try and break through something like Tangrowth with this team, which obviously isn't going to stay on Cinderace or Sizzle, the Rocks chip is super helpful, as Springs. Quillfish H is a bit niche in my opinion, but it fills the same sort of role in setting up the hazards that make the physical offense really difficult to deal with. Dashbun is a Wish Passer, well that's it. The Fairy and Fiery typing and Fire immunity doesn't seem that important when Azu's right there. But it's a perfectly decent Pokemon. The Wish Passing is certainly nice. But yeah. Mega Steelix is a bit odd to me. I don't really get it, as it doesn't really fulfill any offensive niche with Sizzle or Garchomp there. Isn't a great cleaner or breaker, and Nuclear, that's not what Steelix does. But it's a momentum killer on the rest of this. Maybe if you have a very terrible matchup against certain things, you might bring it, but for the most part, I can't see it. I have no idea what Arboliva and Wolverine are doing there, by the way. So I'm basically not even including them on my judgment of this. Naturally, using a roster that has such an experimental team style is bound to have some flaws due to the relatively untested nature of it, so I'm inclined to be nicer about it, but this team is absolutely ruined. I mean, bowled over, obliterated by offensive ghost types. I don't like to stop talking about them because they're super important. Goldengo, Holt, Gengar, Blacephalon all switch in on quite a few things, and threaten massively. Uxie is the main port of entry, but stuff like Goldengo can switch in on a good prediction from Torn, or Dashbun if it comes, and even if it's just through pivoting on their side, they do vast amounts of damage, and they threaten basically the whole roster troublingly easily. Most rosters have a Dark for such a purpose, and Chris does have one too, but Eviolite, Hisui, and Quillfish is not specially bulky enough to take on these gates, especially when you factor in the hazards and it doesn't have Black Sludge. Scarf Blacephalon with Fire Blast, Timid Scarf Blacephalon, does 41% minimum to fully spit out Quillfish. If it's modest Scarf, it will 2k afterwards, which, you know, means that you effectively do not have a Ghost check. So, that's very scary. Secondly, Torn is kind of pigeonholed. Torn is a mon that loves to do what it wants, when it wants, because it is so good at pulling off so many sets. But since Scizor is the only other defogger, and Scizor is primarily offensive in this roster, then Tornadus T is forced to run defog basically every week. This itself isn't terrible, but since Taunty is an amazing defogger, like I mentioned with Zapdos earlier, but it does limit Tornadus significantly. Excuse me. I don't have a lot more to say about this roster, other than it's going to really struggle with the next roster. As it's the kind of thing I haven't seen much of before. As I said, I'll be watching Chris's games. I gave this a 7.5 out of 10. This roster, the thing about the opponent's next roster it struggles with is, I believe, the first one. I don't want to reveal what it is yet, because I'm trying to find the notes. Actually, to hell with it, I won't. Palafin, what last roster struggled with. I'll just give you a quick look. Yeah, Palafin. Nightmare. But anyway, Palafin. Ben's roster is a roster that I've been looking at for a while, and to be honest, for a good while, I wasn't sure if I even loved them. I think it's down to personal preference, but if I try and judge this team as objectively as I can, I think it's great. Palafin and Mega Medicham, despite being two amazing Pokemon, can actually be more difficult than you'd expect to draft them, because they're both terrifically powerful physical attackers with enough set variety to keep opponents guessing, and enough power to blow through even their checks. But when you draft both Pokemon, you double up on the good matchups, yes, against teams full of slow, bulky Pokemon, but you do so at the risk of running into a game where they're walled, or where they simply can't get on the field because of their offenses. Palafin doesn't have this issue as much as Mega Medicham does, but it still does exist. I think Ben recognised this and drafted with that in mind, because his next few picks demonstrate a great understanding of what will get the best out of Palafin and Contamination. Firstly, Arcanine is an Intimidator, with easy switch-ins not only to the fairies that bother Medicham, but the grasses that are going to try and bring Palafin. Great stuff. Serena switches into waters fairly well, and if Ben wants to be safe, you can simply go Blissey and teleport instead. I do like Blissey here. Gengar is a fantastic attacker for a roster like this, because Gengar is at its most dangerous when it isn't the main threat itself, and can work off these bigger threats in the draft. Gengar's stabs are very well suited to dealing with the opposing Ghost, Psychic, and Fairy and Grass types, as well as attacks because it attacks on the special side. I've written that pad in my notes. But yeah, as well as attacks on the special side, which is beneficial because Palafin and Medicham's checks are physical walls. So they're not going to want to take attacks from Gengar because Gengar is powerful. But also, if Gengar is going to force it's going to force a good Dark type to come through or something, that's something that Medicham is going to destroy. So happy days. Gengar can scarf itself for speed, which I do expect quite often, which is a little bit disappointing. Or it can trick the scarf to cripple walls, and it can break the specs, or nasty block, or do honestly whatever it wants. This roster really does enable Gengar pretty well. I do wish the poison was a little bit bulkier, so like Nidoking, but of course Nidoking can't do a lot of those things I just mentioned, so it is, you know, you just can't win. You can't win with me, sorry. But yeah, just so that Gengar could switch into fairies more safely. Because, you know, as it is, even an uninvested Psychic or Psyshock from most fairies is going to really trouble Gengar. Is my music stopped? Yes, keep going. Yeah, where was I up to? It was like Mandibuzz here. I really do like Mandibuzz here. Because it's extra security against the Dark types. And to an extent the Ghost types, so this team does really struggle with. It's also a defensive pivot, which is absolutely fine, so it's not allowed the team to fall behind. And this is partly why Arcanine and Blissey are such good fits too. I don't think we'll see Blissey terrestrialize that often into a Fairy type, because Palafin is just a better Terramon. But the option of it... Oh, I have a graphical error, sorry. Gengar's not the Terramon, Blissey is. I forgot to say that earlier, the text is correct. But yeah. I don't think we'll see Blissey terrestrialize into a Fairy type very often, but it is required to have the option, because this roster does not have a Fairy, which is a really important type to have. And yeah, the only Dragon Resist on this roster, if not Terra Fairy Blissey, is Bronzong, which is famously not got great longevity. Most dragons have a way around Bronzong these days. So yeah, Jolteon and Sandslash, I don't know what I said, I was like, it's the same point. Basically, Bronzong is slightly flawed Dragon Resist, so I would like Blissey. I would like a Fairy type, not Blissey, because I prefer my options not to be forced into terrestrialization. But it's preference. What was that to? Jolteon and Sandslash, yeah, for me they don't do very much. They are kind of mandatory electric immunities, which, you know, and Sandslash is okay removal. But yeah, Jolteon I could see coming a couple times because it is a fast pivot, which this team does really need, to be honest with you. It's one of the main things holding it back. But yeah, I can't see it being much more than that. There are some parts of this roster that I've criticised other rosters for, but I won't really do this so to the same extent here, and I will explain why. There are only 3 rockers on this roster, and Blissey, Bronzong, and Sandslash. They're Blissey, Bronzong, and Sandslash. Realistically, Blissey is the only one of those who will come week in, week out. The reason why this is fine is that Blissey sacrifices almost nothing by fitting rocks onto its moveset, and is an excellent rocker because of all the free turns it generates. Therefore, despite being the only one real, quote-unquote, rocker, I do not have a problem with it. Similarly, Mandibuzz being the only defogger, Sandslash and Serena the only spinners. The thing is, none of these Pokemon are top-tier removals, but they are also, none of them are, you know, technically they have removal but never use it. Right? They all love fitting removal into their moveset. And, you know, even then, this roster doesn't fear rocks that much, because the 2 rock-weak Pokemon in Mandibuzz and Arcanine are boots lovers, you know, they're going to run boots this. Blissey too runs boots a lot. This means that the removal here will probably suffice. The pivoting to me is solid, and I can see how this roster will execute its game plan week in and week out, which is a really good trait to have. It's powerful without being predictable, it's resolute without being passive, and in particular, due to the powerful nature of Terrabortum, Palafin, and Medicham in particular, you cannot take 3 turns against this roster for granted. It will punish you. My criticisms of this roster are threefold. One, the lack of a fairy type is a serious hindrance to this team. Some matchups you will not want to trust, honestly. And even if you do, there are plenty of dragons that can set up on even stab, dazzling, green, blissing. I wish I'd done the calcs for this, because this is something I would like to have calcs in front of me now for. But something like Baxcalibur jumps to mind as something that I suspect can set up on Blissey without too much trouble. Or something like Dragonite will not struggle at all. Garchomp probably be fine, if I had to guess. Maybe needs some investment. My point is that it will not do enough on its own. This brings me to my second criticism, which is the vulnerability to certain setup sweepers. Not all of them, because this roster is not vulnerable to setup sweepers. Fake Out, Bullet Punch Medi, Jet Punch Palafin, Whirlwind Mandible, Scarf Destiny Bond, slash Destiny Bond game, you can just run Scarf, Trick or something, and Intimidate Willow Arcanine are all really good tools to stop or slow down a sweep. The main threat to this team is, for me, the Dragon types. As I mentioned with Blissey earlier, particularly those with Terra Steel. Yeah, because we've got to think about that in this format. Because those Pokemon can set up on Blissey and Mandibuzz without too much fear, unless they're going to get rattled by foul play. They can have a bit of fear. As well as Choice Locked Gengar and Palafin. Something else you've got to remember, if you're going to want to run lots of choice users, you've got to have a plan for when those choice locked moves are going to get taken advantage of. This roster might find difficulty responding to them after that. My final criticism is the lack of offensive pivots. Something I mentioned earlier with regards to Jolteon. Palafin is pulling a ton of weight in this department. The problem with Palafin as an offensive pivot is that the walls it baits in are not walls that Medicham can easily take advantage of. Gengar does, but you mainly want those top two expensive attackers to support each other. So it's you know, I'm half like, oh, it's fantastic, you can go Palafin into Gengar on basically all the Palafin's checks. But then I'm like, oh, but you want to make use of Medicham, where's Medicham going to get it? So yeah, Jolteon's useful but not that amazing, and so for me I would have liked to see an offensive pivot on this roster instead of Bronzer. That being said, it does still need the steel typing. So I'm not going to act like I have a perfect answer, I simply don't. So yeah. With that said though, even though I prefer a little bit more bulk in the Arcanine slot and other minor changes, I do think this is a very strong roster, so I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. One last cut before we go into the final two. See you in a second. Alright, before we go into number 1, I want to say something. Firstly, I'm about to tell you a lot of good things about this next team. It is by no means perfect, it is by no means the best thing ever, but at the same time it was always going to be first. I'm not going to faff about. If you've been keeping track of who's been, taken so far, you'll know who it is. But number 1, too far, is Dashing Sceptile. Now, I love this roster. I want to start off by saying, yeah, not perfect. Another good rocker would have been nice, as well as a better anti-ghost mod. But I really, really like this roster. It is bulky offense, and it is a great example of bulky offense, because as you may have surmised, nothing here is frail. With the possible exception of Meowscarada and Shifu on the special side, nothing here is really frail. Every single mon on this team can take a neutral hit, and even some super effective hits, and retaliate pretty well. Again, not literally everything, you're still missing things like Corviknight, Blumroller, but for the vast majority, even Corviknight can retaliate respectively and can pivot. But yeah, something that's really important is the art of the 2-for-1, and the idea of a 2-for-1, and the idea of threatening the opponent using block. It is key to making teams like this work, and though it will be good to see if Dashing Sceptile can demonstrate this, I honestly feel that the way this roster is drafted tell me that he doesn't already. An example of such understanding lies in why he took Nidoqueen instead of Nidoking. Dashing Sceptile actually picked Nidoqueen up one draft pick before Nidoking was picked up. He had the choice of both. As soon as he picked up Nidoking went, which I thought was interesting. And so he had choice of both. He went Nidoking. And so the understanding of the difference between the two and why you went Nidoking is really important. If that was a Nidoking there, I would like this roster quite a bit less. It'd probably still be top, but I'd like it quite a bit less. For example, Nidoking's faster, Nidoqueen's bulkier. These are the differences between the two. Nidoking's extra speed makes it more useful on Scarf sets in particular, but Nidoqueen's extra bulk makes it a better 2-for-1 one, despite its worst special attack. Because Nidoqueen can live hits from a lot more Pokemon, like defensive land AT, and use its super effective coverage to trade. Nidoking cannot do this to the same level because it's lesser bulk, right? It's also not as good as a Hazard Setter, for example. But I'm going to move on because I have so much to say about this team. More examples of great synergy and heads-up team building is pairing Meowscarada and Urshifu Rapid with Nidoqueen. Because you've got two fairy weak threats that bait in physical walls, alongside Nidoqueen, who murders, utterly trounces most fairies. Psychic coverage is annoying, but clicking a Psychic move on Meowscarada is a bit of a ballsy pick anyway, and it's not like your Nidoqueen is the only option for switching Animal Sheath against a fairy. Nidoqueen also resists bug and fighting moves from Meowscarada, is immune to electric from Shifu, and crucially is neutral to flying for both. You may think the neutral to flying bit doesn't really matter, but it really does, because something like Gyarados can really threaten them when Meowscarada and Shifu Rapid, and say your Corviknight has been chipped down to 60% or something. You can go Nidoqueen and absorb the fighting move that they clicked because they predicted Rotom Heat, because that's what you went to first, or because they predicted Corviknight. And the fact that is that even if you get that prediction wrong, you will not lose your Nidoqueen, and you can then pivot to something else, preserve Nidoqueen, their choice opting to Brave Bugs is the Gyarados, then not the choice there. And if they're not, then you've probably got down by then and you can go with it. My point is, something like that flying neutrality is something that's a little bit underrated in my opinion, in terms of Pokemon synergy. People look at resistances and weaknesses, but what's the neutral to this? Nidoqueen is also perfect at defensively checking an opposing threat without giving off defensive momentum, which is kind of the name of the game for this team. And it's why it's those aspects of this team that I love the most. Personally, I'm not a fan of Terrasteel and Nidoqueen, because I think Nidoqueen's typing is too valuable to go away. But that's just me, essentially. I also think Rotom Heat is amazing at doing similarly what Nidoqueen does, but it does it in a different way. They both take hazards. They both take a hit well on the way in. But whereas Nidoqueen tends to attack or lay hazards, Rotom Heat can move hazards, spread status, or Volt Switch into something like Meowscarada, maybe Diancie, or maybe Urshifu Rapid. I've been recording for a long time, excuse my brain falling apart. And we haven't even mentioned Corviknight yet, really. Corviknight's weaknesses are electric and fire, eaten alive by Rotom Heat and Nidoqueen. And you thought they weren't enough? You've got your bloody Chi-Yu, you're not afraid of any of them? You've got a Goodra at the back. Goodra is such a good blanket special check, which is totally unbreakable with a fucking Alomomola wish supports, right? This is really, really good, guys. This is really, really good. This roster can go fast and aggressive with top 6. It's not forced to run bulky offense. It's not forced to run a more balanced team. It can go fast and aggressive. By just running this top 6, as I said, you can run a pretty effective defensive team. Mega Diancie, Corviknight, with Nidoqueen, Rotom Heat, Alomomola, Goodra. This team is incredibly customizable, with every facet of it able to be mixed and matched. Many times in these PRs, I've said how multiple Pokemon doing the same job is a negative, and the inefficient use of team slots, and that is true, but all of these bulky Pokemon do not do the same job, or even close to it. Corviknight, on paper, is a bulky pivot, same as Rotom Heat, but in practice they do so much more that differentiates them. Corviknight can also bulk up, agility, weakness policy if it wants to be, iron defensive body threat. It has that reliable recovery, and it's got an amazing typing. Rotom Heat also has a great typing, but Rotom Heat can be Scarf, Nasty Plot, Boots, loads of other things. Nidoqueen can be Bulky Hazards, a Resist Berry, Choice Item, Black Sludge, Life Orb Attacker. Goodra can be Scarf, Specs, AV, Leftovers. Alomomola is the most one note of these, but it still provides a function that nothing else on the team does, in Wish, and a very, very appreciated one, because despite the bulk on this team, there isn't really anything with a massive HP stat outside of Alomomola, meaning that Alomomola's wishes are going to heal everything massively. You wish with Alomomola and switch into Mega Diancie, very little is going to overcome it. It's not, stab super effective move. And so you get Diancie and you take 60%, you get healed back up to full. Rotom Heat's got a really terrible HP stat, but Alomomola will heal it to full basically every time. These synergies are so good, man. They're so good. This is why stacking of bulk is a massive plus in this team's favour, because it's not thoughtless. It's not like, this is a good bulky one, I want this. This is a good bulky one, I want this. This is a good bulky one, I want this. It's not like that. This team took very, very scary offensive threats in the first 2 rounds, took a great defensive wall/pivot, another great offensive pivot, in addition to Masquerada, that covers the first 2's weaknesses to fire and ground types really well, as well as hitting dark types, which is another option for it, which has never hurt, in the Shifu, and then fill the rest of the team with tools to get the best out of the first few. That can even function as a team on its own. Stacking a bulk is a massive plus in this team's favour. The only singular bit I do not understand is Photograph. Poor thing. Because if I'm trying to beat this team, that's the weak thing. I put in specs on my Blacephalon or Gengar or whatever. I put up the basic details. And I'm hammering away with basically unresisted Shadow Balls. But the thing is, unlike most of the time when you're hammering away basically unresisted Shadow Balls, this team does not automatically fold to that, because they still have Goodra and Alomomola, which combined is going to check basically any ghost. I think you might struggle with something like Taunt Spectria, but I don't think we're allowed Spectria, so super. It's just so good. It shows how effective this roster is. That you can try and think of things that are going to beat this roster, but this roster can play around basically all of them. You want to lead with hazards, Mega Diancie is going to counter lead you, and chances are it's going to have a reasonable matchup against whatever you go with. I just think this team has so many strong points. I think it's so strong. Parts of the team could be a little more solid, such as the risk of from mons like, say it with me now, Pyramid and Bundle. But even then, Corviknight and Rotom Heat are pretty decent. Combined when holding Pyramid, and Bundle is Bundle, to be honest. I feel bad criticising anything for using Bundle, because it's a fucking monstrosity. I'd also probably like another Fighting Resist, maybe another base 100 plus speed mon, because the only Fighting Resist right now is weak to Earthquake, which is not ideal. But yeah, another 100 plus speed mon would be nice. Another Rocker somewhere might be nice. Only being Nidoqueen kind of sucks, but yeah. A lot of thought went into this roster, I can tell, and I really like it. I hope I persuaded you why I liked it, because for me, as soon as I saw this roster, which was quite late on, I think I looked at the team 14, because I just went in the order of the draft. As soon as I got to this team, I was like, yeah, this team's done. I knew it straight away. Not to act like, oh, your teams are all bad. I really want to impress that is not the point. I know how dispiriting it can be to get low on a power rankings, because I've had my fair share of 15s and whatnot. But maybe that what I just said will discredit everything I've said so far. But I mean, I hope that I like to think that I can see a good roster even though I'm not that good at it. And I also think that everything I've said in this video has made sense, long as the video will turn out to be. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, for sitting through this very long video. A lot of time went into this. As I said, the Word doc with my notes on it has 11,702 words. And I might put that up as well alongside this, just if anyone wanted to, grab my notes in a more easily digestible form. But yeah. Yeah, again, also bear in mind, I was rating the roster, not the player, therefore I did not take the player into account of the server. Yeah, I don't think I have much else to say except, you know, hit me up, look at my channel. I am going to be posting more OBS. Week 2 is not going to go up though because I've just not had the time to record it and my essays. I will be recording week 3 though, so that should be some good fun. Well, I'm aiming to record week 3. I want to make it promises. We know what I'm like with doing everything. But that is it. That is it for this massive fucking recording. I'm gonna stitch it together now, get it uploaded as soon as I can, and then put it in announcements. So yeah, peace. Have a good one, guys. See ya.